comment what I haven't seen via the video that has been captured and published later are the names of the supervisors being either read or, shown a screen capture of the vote totals from roll call votes. It would be behoove public interest and open government here to either read, if there's 3 or 4 people dissenting, to read their names and, and read off the votes, or show a screen capture that's captured in the video of who voted which way on any roll call votes. Section 19.832 in state statutes regarding meetings of public government bodies states that during a period of public comment, the government body may discuss matters raised by the public. My reading of that as a layperson and not an attorney states that supervisor response agenda item is superfluous, and that statutory requirements ask that the chair seek any supervisor discussion during the actual public comment period and not in the agenda item following it. I don't know what the difference is, but I would hope that starting today that the chair would recognize the state law regarding when supervisors are allowed. The government body may discuss any matter raised by the public during the public comment period. So anyway, I hope that's shared. I sent a letter to all the supervisors on Sunday. I hope somebody is going to go through the court filings for the Forestville Mill Pond versus the county that was filed last Thursday, and demand that the chair hold a meeting with a closed session for all the supervisors to be informed of what your legal representatives are doing in your name as county supervisors. I think it's pretty flimsy in my public opinion, and I would be ashamed to support it if I were a county supervisor. So that's, I hope you'd please bring that up, and I hope the county asks some questions about when when supervisors are supposed to respond to public comment, and I think my 3 minutes is probably near up. So thank you very much.
Okay, Christine Reed, I have you, or you have the floor. I have you, you have yourself muted, but you can speak. You have to unmute yourself.
Christine Reed. I live on the Forestville Flowage in Forestville. And to supplement the county administrator's monthly report, I would like to give a very current update on the conditions of the drawdown at Forestville Dam. I just returned from the morning walk to check, so it's very current. Sediment is transporting through the open valve. The water level has stabilized. It's the same level that it was yesterday. So it probably, unless there's high evaporation, that water level probably will not lower. We're not seeing signs of dry out, but there is still, in spite of flushing for over 20 months, there still is visible sediment within the mill pond and considerable sediment visible downstream. And perhaps someone can tell us what they've discovered so far about the possible damage to the mechanical valve. The valve was partially closed. It was subjected to very high velocity water flow when the water levels raise, which happens routinely. We called and reported that to ACOM and to the DNR someone came out the following morning, raised the valve so that it was no longer being subjected to the battering of the high levels of the water. However, a sharp piece of metal is protruding from the bottom of the shield over the valve. It looks like a dagger, and it's been there since that day that they raised that valve up. And we requested that someone do an inspection to verify if this drawdown is scheduled to end September 1st, and you plan to gradually lower that valve in order to back up the water behind it, it has to be functioning. So we're wondering if anyone did an inspection, what the conditions are for that valve, if it's going to operate properly, and what we should expect to happen starting September 1st. That's my update. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Again, is there anyone else who would like to speak? With that, we can go to the rest of the agenda.
Okay. Supervisor's response. Is there any supervisor's response? Okay. Approval of the minutes of July 27th. Sorry. Oh. That's right, Carrie.
Hey, I just wanted to echo two things that I heard. One is the live stream via YouTube. I think that's a fantastic idea, and I would love to see that happen as well. And also the request for court filings. And I do feel like I would love more transparency, more communication, besides just being told not to discuss it with certain groups. And I feel like there's this veil of secrecy around the Forestville Dam. And I understand a lot of us weren't on the former board, but I guess I would just echo the words of the public comment and hope that there could be some sort of closed meeting where where we find out more about the court proceedings.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Approval of the minutes of the July 27, 2021 regular meeting. We have a motion and a second. Are there any changes, deletions, additions, grammatical errors, corrections, or other remarks? If not, by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Item 9, County Administrator.
Sure, if you just give me 1 second, I gotta just adjust this. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with Sue. I'll move you in. I know she has just a quick PowerPoint to go over with us this morning, so I'm gonna go through and I'll share my screen. Technology is not working. Okay, Sue, I have the PowerPoint up and I can drive it for you.
All right,
Okay.
I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everybody. So the only constant in this pandemic has been change. COVID-19 does not disappoint. It keeps evolving and changing. Here at Public Health, we thought really we were getting to the end of the marathon, and it feels like now we have more miles to go, and I'm sure you're feeling that way also. So Door County, along with the rest of the country, is having a surge in cases caused by the Delta variant. It's highly infectious and spreading more quickly than other variants. It's a whole new ballgame with the Delta variant. With the original COVID strain of virus, on average, each case would infect 2 others, who would each then infect 2 others for 6 new cases total from each original case. With the Delta variant, each case on average infects 5 other people, who in turn infect 5 others for 25 cases total. So you can see how it spreads exponentially. In May, you recall evidence showed that vaccinated people were not spreading COVID. In August, with the situation change in the Delta virus, we learned that the variant could be spread by vaccinated people. Therefore, we all need to mask, specifically in indoor public places and outdoors if crowded. Vaccines have been shown to protect people from emerging variants. Anyway, I wanted to show this map of the US to help us get some perspective. Next slide, please. To give some context, in June, this is the timeline of the pandemic cases in Door County. And you can see the dates along the bottom, and you can see that we're having an uptick now. And that confirmed case number is cumulative, along with cumulative probable case number. So to give context, in June, we had a total for the whole month of 10 confirmed cases. In July, we had 17. I wrote this yesterday afternoon, and I said, so far in August, we've had 90 confirmed cases, but this morning we've got 9 more cases. Some of those may be probable and some confirmed. So 90 plus cases. And we've had 11 new hospitalizations in August, no new deaths to date. So at Public Health, we never stopped contact tracing. It was just that there is not much of it needed for June and early July. Now we've shifted again in response to the surge in cases. We were able to call back some of our contact tracers. They agreed to help us out once again. 4 of them have returned to help us keep up with the volume of cases. Next slide, please. A common question is, you know.
1 second.
Wait.
Sorry. Go ahead, Sue. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. One of the common questions is who is getting COVID by age group. So this is Door County cases by age group from July to the present. And you can see it's really a mix. We've been fortunate enough not to have any children younger than 10 have had diagnosis of COVID since the beginning of July. In every region across the state, COVID hospitalizations are growing. In conversation with partners from DCMC last week, I'm hearing that they're nearly full on a daily basis, but only a few of those are hospitalizations due to COVID. Breakthrough cases. So this slide talks about people who test positive for COVID-19 more than 2 weeks after their completed vaccine series are said to have breakthrough infections. And you can see that well, COVID vaccines are extremely effective at preventing illness, serious illness, hospitalization, and death, but no vaccine is 100% effective. And as such, we do expect to see some fully vaccinated people test positive for COVID-19. Breakthrough cases typically report mild illness or no symptoms. But anyway, this chart shows Wisconsin COVID cases for the month of July. And the blue represents cases in people who are fully vaccinated, and the red are those not fully vaccinated. And you can see there were nearly 3 times as many cases in the not fully vaccinated folks as there were in the vaccinated. Then the dark blue represents, and the dark red represents hospitalizations, and the black shows death rate per 100,000 people. And not sure if you can read that, but the death rate for those fully vaccinated is 0.1, and for not vaccinated is 1.1. Since August 1st, 17 out of those 90 cases I mentioned of confirmed cases were breakthrough infections. Since April, less than 5 breakthrough cases in Door County were hospitalized or died. Across the state, vaccinations, just over 50% of the total population has now been fully vaccinated. In Door County, we're still doing well. We're one of the top counties at 66% overall. We still have work to do, especially in the younger age groups. Of course, a percentage of our population, that little gray at the end of the bar graph there, represents those under 12 who are still not eligible for vaccine. So they would be vulnerable. We continue to have weekly vaccine clinics here at our office Wednesday afternoons, every 3 weeks at the fire station in Sister Bay, and periodically on Washington Island. We're going there again tomorrow. Our webpage has all the information. We also continue to provide home visits for COVID vaccination by request for those that are homebound. We've had a request by the Sevastopol Township to do a clinic there in September. I don't have the date for that. It's early September. It'll be on the webpage. And we're beginning to plan again for larger scale clinics. Next slide, please. You're probably aware that there's been an announcement that booster doses will be rolled out for everyone beginning September 20th. More to learn about that. It's for those that received Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. So the big news yesterday was FDA approved Pfizer vaccine. And of course, they changed the name. You can see the brand name there that will be used going forward. And last week, the recommendation for third additional doses for those moderately to severely immunocompromised was put out, and we began doing those vaccinations. So we will certainly accommodate you. If you fit into that category, please call us for an appointment. And then also you might have seen the news that from August 20th to September 6th, if you get your first dose of COVID vaccine, the state will give you a $100 Visa gift card, and you can register online or call an 800 number for that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we continue to meet with school leaders and school nurses on a regular basis to help them plan COVID safe practices. Returning to in-person school is certainly a priority this year. Experts at the CDC, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Wisconsin Department of Public Instructions, as well as us at Door County Public Health, recommend that everyone in K through 12 schools universally wear masks. Students and staff are obviously a mixed population of vaccinated and unvaccinated, and masks are a really important tool that work best when everybody wears them. As I talked about earlier, transmission of the Delta virus is explosive. So we used to think that kids didn't get the virus. It's now recognized that children are probably infected at similar rates as adults are and have transmission rates comparable with adults. It's just that children are more likely to have mild symptoms or no symptoms. However, despite having mild or no symptoms, children can still spread COVID just as adults can. So we recommend layered mitigation strategies in schools. So universal masking, physical distancing, cohorting. We recommend staying home sick and getting tested, promoting the ventilation. Most of the schools have updated their ventilation systems. And of course, the things like hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette, cleaning and disinfection, all of those pandemic behaviors are still encouraged. So the more of these strategies that schools are able to put into practice, the safer students and staff will be this fall. So in all of this, what are the current priorities? Number one is vaccinations. They're the most important prevention tool we have. Getting vaccinated decreases the risk of severe infection, hospitalization, and death. And as I said earlier, have been shown to be effective in protecting us from the emerging variants. Another priority is masking. Multiple studies reinforce that masking is safe and can substantially decrease the spread. Obviously, we recommend staying home when sick and getting tested. We're hoping that employers can continue policies that support people's choice to stay home when sick. And, the other pandemic behaviors, physical distancing, hand washing, all of that is important. And lastly, if you get diagnosed with COVID, please follow the guidelines to isolate. And please talk to us when we call you on the phone to follow up. And then just one last comment, please know that at Public Health, we're always happy to answer questions about anything COVID related, to provide information about the vaccine or anything, and to dispel any misinformation. We follow the science. And that's all I have for the update this morning. Thank you.
Any questions for Sue? Biz?
Speak, but, well, no, it just came up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sue, I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but I'm sure you're aware that, especially in the last couple of weeks, that I'm sure when people come in and they're infected, they have to fill out a form of where they've been and how they got infected. And what the question is that many people from Door County attend Brewer games where there's lots and lots of people close together, very few wearing masks. And then especially in the last 2 weeks at the Packer games, 60 to 70,000 people all crowded in that stadium. And is there any indication that Door County people infected were at these real large gatherings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what you describe, are likely riskier situations of concern. At present, we're not identifying any particular sources like that of multiple cases. We see a lot of, with Delta variant, household spread is almost a given. If you have it, your household is probably just all going to get it. But other than that, we're not seeing any large amount of cases from big gatherings as you describe, at least in, the cases we follow up with.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions for Sue? Okay, thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Okay, just then, for the rest of the report, I would just defer to my staff memo. In terms of the mill pond, we did include the announcement in terms of, following our still intended plan in terms of operation or starting to fill back up the pond. Again, that'll be obviously dependent upon the weather. And then likewise, we'll be working with both parks and also soil and water to do what we consider a closeout report or a report on some of the observations that we've, observed throughout the project. And we're hoping to do that probably in November or December would be the time frame, just because they're going to be doing some work in relation to that. So in terms of that, otherwise I'll just defer then to the staff now if there's any other questions. If not, we can proceed on with the rest of the agenda.
Any questions of Ken? Okay. Resolutions. Resolution 2021-57, petition the Secretary of Transportation for Airport Improvement Aid by Door County Chairline Airport, Door County, Wisconsin. Roy?
Yes, thank you, Sheriff. This is a petition that we have to do every 2 years, I guess, to get this information. And it really boils down to, and I make a motion to approve this resolution number 2021-57.
Any questions? We're going to do this on the voter board. We have a motion and a second. We're going to go to the voter board for this. That is passed by a majority vote of 20 yea, 1 vacant. Resolution 2021-58, approval of gift grant and or donation to the Door County Sheriff's Office. Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution 2021-58 for a live scan.
Any other explanation or questions? Anybody? It has a fiscal impact, so we'll also go to the voter board. That is passed by a majority vote of 19 yea, 1 nay. Resolution 2021-59, Canine Unit Officer and Dog Teams. Joel?
I'd like to approve resolution 2021-59 for, creation of a, deputy sheriff and dog teams for canine unit.
Questions? Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this is, they're talking about 2 dog teams. We had 1. And I think I was the lone dissenting voice in the committee. And I don't see the need for 2 dog teams. I get why we need a dog, and we obviously our dog that we had recently passed away, so we're gearing up to, have another dog, but they're looking at 2 dog teams. I just don't see the point of us needing 2 dog teams, so I'm a no vote, and I just wanted to explain why. Thanks.
David Engelbert?
Yes, just a question regarding the resolution. I was under the impression that it was allowing for a second dog team. This talks about a multiple. Is this like an open-ended resolution then, that they can get a third or fourth if they deem necessary without coming back to county board? Or what's the, it doesn't say second, it says multiple.
Grant?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. The resolution does not limit it to any particular number. It would still have to go through, if there was a fiscal impact or additional positions, the budget process, but it doesn't expressly limit it to 2. It does reference 2 in terms of the addendum to the resolution, because that is the current state of affairs. But it allows for an expansion, but again, it would be subject to fiscal limitations and going through the normal process if it resulted in additional staff being employed by the Sheriff's Department. You could certainly limit it to 2 if you wanted to.
David Enigo?
Thank you. I know in larger cities and that stuff, they have multiple dog teams. My question is this going to be, the intent is to get they're designed, they're trained for different types of purposes. Is that the intent this way? That clearly we're missing a piece out of the original dog configuration?
Pat, would you come up?
In other words, we're basically gaining another way of policing due to the nature of how you train animals.
Thank you. In regards to our canine unit, it was first established in 2017 after a 29-year absence. And at that time, we went with a dual-purpose dog. So a dog that is trained in detection work and then also apprehension work, basically where it has the capability to bite a suspect to take him into custody. And we did have some very serious calls where we were able to intervene with the use of the canine and avoid a deadly force situation. This second dog would be trained strictly in detection. So it would be tracking, drug detection, things like that. So for missing person cases, and recently after Odin passed, we did have a situation where we needed a dog. And we were forced back to where we were 5 years ago, where we had to reach out to surrounding agencies, Brown County, Kewaunee County, to help us with canine work to find this missing person. So the reason we're asking for multiple dogs is our current canine deputy works 6 days on, 3 days off. So on his days off, if we need a canine, we're bringing him back into work. So the second dog would give us a canine capability 7 days a week, but the second dog would be trained strictly in tracking and detection.
So then my equal concern is the document is open-ended, but yet you read the detail that implies a second dog. If I can, I would make a motion to amend it to stop at 2 dogs. That would cause it to have to come back again. you know, to justify the increase in traffic, justifying the need for it. I tried to press amend and I didn't see it would light up.
What?
You got it?
You got it?
It's it, well, you got it. And now,
And I'm gonna play the poor supervisor and ask Grant to write the correct verbiage that actually works out that way.
It's actually pretty simple. I think line 28, you change the word multiple to TWO.
Okay, that would work for me. I too have a difficulty in understanding the nature of our county having a need of any great number of additional configurations.
Okay, so Grant, we have a motion. We're looking for a second, right? Motion to
Correct.
amend. Does anyone second that?
I'll second.
Okay.
actually, Megan has it.
Where's it?
I'm good with that too.
It says Lundell seconded it.
Well, where'd it go?
At top
Oh,
of the
there it is,
screen.
okay.
I didn't have the go pushed.
We got it,
I
we
have
got
to
it.
push.
Okay, so this up here is the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we have a motion to amend line 28 to make it 2 instead of the word multiple. And that's what we'll be voting on. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Okay,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna ask again.
Okay. All right. Now, start over. Any on the motion to amend? Megan?
Thank you. I just wanted to relay that as far as I recall, we only discussed 2 rather than multiple at committee level. And also that, in this case, you know, there is no new hire happening. This would be certifying, an officer that is already on our staff.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
I'm just noting that I see the word multiple in line 6 also, so I don't know if that's okay to leave multiple there, or if that also needs to read 2 in this amendment.
I can answer that. That, what Bob points out is what the sheriff recommends, and I don't think it's appropriate for the county board to change what the sheriff is recommending. And where we're amending it is sort of in the meat and potatoes of the resolution, and now therefore be it resolved. So I'm comfortable with the change to line 28.
Thank you, Corp Counsel.
Anybody else on amendment? Alexis?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that I, being on the public safety and the finance, considered this a couple times. So I will not be supporting the amendment because I want to leave it to the sheriff's office to determine what their needs are, and then it has to come back to county board for any financial impact anyway. So I was comfortable with the resolution as presented, and we'll be voting that way. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Todd?
Seeing you've got Pat here handy, I mean, do you see any impact of changing from multiple to 2 in regard to how you intended to utilize this?
I think our intent was for 2 dogs, and that's what the addendum includes. So just to give you a little background on how this thing is funded, Sheriff Delarwell, when he decided he wanted to create a canine unit, went to the Door Community Foundation. We set up the Door Crime Prevention Foundation for people to make donations to the canine unit. And the reason we are here today is in order to move ahead with that fundraising, we needed to know whether it was for 1 or 2 dogs. So after this meeting, we'll kind of dictate how we proceed with the Crime Prevention Foundation in regards to fundraising.
So you wouldn't see any impact if you went from...
No, I don't think the intent was to go beyond 2.
Supportive of this, and I have a little dog.
Biz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have a question on this amendment. However, I do have a question on the money. fiscal impact is showing the only cost to Door County would be $7,216 annually paid to each canine officer. So that's over $14,000. However, the estimated cost for the training is $33,700. I guess the question is that all donated money and that's not included in the fiscal impact? Or could someone explain the money part?
Pat?
So the addendum that you include shows it's kind of a worst case scenario. First of all, that is funded all through donations. So any cost in regards to our former canine Odin was paid through the Crime Prevention Foundation. So what you see in that addendum for canine replacement and canine addition is the cost to go to New Mexico for training. When Deputy Tussle started as a canine officer, he reached out to surrounding agencies and found that Brown and Outagamie County both went to New Mexico to receive their training and get their dogs. So as a new canine handler, we felt it was important for him to have a support network here in Northeast Wisconsin. So that's why Deputy Tussle went to New Mexico to get this dog. With the canine addition, we're looking at potentially reducing that cost kind of significantly by potentially getting a dog from a kennel here in Wisconsin. Myself and Lieutenant Shortreed went and visited a kennel, and that's probably the direction we're going to go for the second dog. In regards to the fiscal impact, our current collective bargaining agreement is up for negotiations right now, and I think both sides are looking at ways to lessen that fiscal impact. We do have to compensate the canine handler for the care and maintenance of that dog. But it's kind of open-ended in regards to what that compensation package looks like. So that's one of the things that's being discussed right now as we negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement.
So this $7,216 for each officer, that's money that's going to be paid for the officers to care for the dog outside of working hours. Is that correct?
So that's one of the things we're looking at. We have to compensate the canine handler, and one of the proposals that we're potentially looking at is having them work a 7.5-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. So that extra half hour would be his but still being paid for 8. But that would be his care and maintenance time for that dog. The fiscal impact is kind of a worst case scenario written off of what our current collective bargaining agreement is. But like I said, I think both sides are open to looking at ways to reduce that fiscal impact.
David, Enigo?
So two of the items and why I was looking to get it changed down to 2, one of them is none of these decisions happen instantly. So, should you be in a position of needing a third one, it takes time to go through that process anyway. So there's time to come back to this board asking for a third unit. The other one is that the comment of if there's no fiscal impact, it would, if there's going to be a fiscal impact, it would have to come back to us for review anyways. Well, if they could get complete donations to pay for all of it, then it would never come back to us. If I'm incorrect, Grant or Steve, I see he's in the back.
Well, if it's over $5,000, it comes to the county board as a gift, grant, or donation, so.
Still.
I'm just, well, you asked if it ever came back. I'm just giving you how it would come back in that sense, but.
Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to mirror that there is a possible scenario where this would not have fiscal impact, and therefore that would not be a check and balance, which is why I believe it's important to include this amendment.
Okay. David, Engelbert?
Yeah, I guess I'd echo these last couple comments that it's not about opposition to the canine unit. It's very well likely needed, but it's just not to have the resolution open-ended. If the request that came to public safety was for a second dog, then that's what we should be addressing, and not future scenarios that we may then wish to have come back to the board.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so we will go to the voter board for the motion to amend, removing the word multiple in line 28, inserting number 2. That is passed by a majority vote of 18 yea, 2 nay, and 1 absent, 1 vacant. Okay. Now we're back to the amended motion, the newly amended motion. Is there any other discussion on the existing amended motion? If not, we'll go to the voter board. That is passed by a majority vote of 18 yea, 2 nay, and 1 vacant. Thank you. Resolution 2021-60, authorize application for an acceptance of financial assistance for the George K. Pinney County Park Brick Wall Assessment. Dan?
Yes, I would like to make that motion. Is to get some money from the state to help repair the brick wall at Pinney Park.
Okay. Any questions? Involves funds, we'll go to the voter board. That is passed on a vote of 20 yea, 1 vacant. Resolution 2021-61, supporting a land acknowledgement statement. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to present this resolution to the full board, and I encourage the members to support Resolution 2021-61. If there's a second, yeah. Just a little background. This came forth from the Land Conservation Committee about 1.5 years ago. The LCC was working on the county's 10-year land and water plan, and in that process, there was a suggestion from the Oversight Committee in that process to include a land acknowledgement with that plan. And so since that was an LCC, that was under LCC's committee's purview, it was then forwarded to the Legislative Committee to investigate and to study and to look at this notion of a land acknowledgement. We've spent a number of meetings talking about it, looking at different variations, studying different people's versions, listening to and reading up on why and why this is important and why people do a land acknowledgement. I believe we've really distilled something down that's straightforward, simple. It's scholarly. We basically are very much mirroring what Lawrence University did. If you look on their website, this is pretty similar to theirs. I appreciate the Corp Counsel's Office for all their help and their research on it. Through the process, we also had a new committee member. As we know, we lost committee member Tauser, and we gained committee member Gauger, and so there was also a kind of a bringing up to speed and an education process, and also some really good questions in that effort. Also some scholarly research from Supervisor Gauger as well. I appreciate that, and I think we have something here that is simple and scholarly and important, so I encourage everybody to support the motion.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Yes, and following that, I was newly joined on the committee and glad to be on the committee, and I came in the midstream of this, so I had some questions, some reservations, and I tried to get up to speed and research land acknowledgements. I actually had an experience this summer. I went to the Northern Sky Theater, and there was a land acknowledgement before the theater production, and so that made me think about that and the reaction of the audience. So yeah, I kind of got into the curve here. So my questions at the committee level, we had very good discussion, and they may be questions that you have here as well. So I want to kind of share that my thought process and the discussions that we had, so that can help you make a decision on this. My first question was this created as per a request from a specific tribal representative? Because that to me was important. If someone had reached out to us, that would have been important. I found that that wasn't the case, but it framed some of my thinking. But then I'm like, well, what can this do? How does a acknowledgement help? Who does it help? Those were some of my questions. What problems does it address? Who might it harm? Would there be any harm in this? I was reading some Native American accounts that these can become across as somewhat insincere. So I wanted to make sure that this wasn't insincere in any way or offensive. If you research as I did, it gets complex in our history, and I really enjoyed doing that because I learned a lot about Door County history. Going further and further back, it is complex. I did find a lot of interesting information about our native peoples who inhabited Door County further and further back, and it is a complex history. So then who do we include, what names or no names? It kind of settled on Menominee, which were the most recent peoples. So I was comfortable enough with that. I respect what committee Chairman Boltman said, that Native Americans agree that the only bad land acknowledgement is no land acknowledgement. So I thought about that as well. In the do no harm, do we help kind of questioning. And then my final questions, and I did get some input from my constituents. They asked me, why is county government involved in making a land acknowledgement? So that's another thought and thoughtful process. Is that something county government? I mean, I felt comfortable with the Northern Sky Theater, Lawrence University, on the university level for sure, but county government. So those are my thoughts. Bottom line, I would say it's not a bad thing. It could be a show of sensitivity by our county. But on the other hand, we need to balance that, be conscious that some constituents, as they have already with me, question the use of our time and resources if we stray too far off course from primary duties. And how we define those primary duties, of course, is going to be different for every constituent. So I do respect the time and effort in this. I will be supporting this based on that thought process that I went through. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did take the opportunity to visit with Elizabeth yesterday on this resolution because I knew she was on the committee, and I understood she had some good insight into this, and it was a very good visit. And I had many of the same questions, in regard to, what are we doing? What is the purpose of this? Who will benefit from this? And at the end of the day, is this what we should be doing as a supervisory group? And I understand that there is certainly a lot of history that was explained to me regarding the tumultuous, if you'll call it that, things that may have gone on in our county as it relates to tribes and things of that facet, where lands were probably stolen and restolen, so to speak, time and again. And I understand that this came through committee and it was supported, and I appreciate Elizabeth's comments, but I really am not on board with things like this because of that. I don't really understand how it's so much benefiting us other than, reading once a year and so on and so forth. So I probably, unless I hear something differently, I'm not so interested in supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David Engelbert?
Yes, I guess I appreciate the background that Elizabeth gave us. From my own experience with the expansion of Highway 57 through Southern Door, that goes back to 1992, and the federal government, state government created a committee to take a look at some of the archaeological sites that were there, and UW Milwaukee did a lot of research on it. Right now, there's a kiosk at the Belgian Heritage Center, and I guess I'm going to doubt that any of you have stopped there to take a look and read it. There's several panels there that explains some of the archaeological, the information they found at the different digs between the town of Union going into Dykesville. That goes back to BC timeframe. And some of it is now, emphasized probably more from the 1600s on, so that I don't have all the details written down here of what's the information there, but the Menominee and Ho-Chunk were the Indians that they found around Green Bay in the early 1600s. The Potawatomi and others came later because of being moved out of their territory by the Iroquois. So anyway, there were 4 different tribes that were represented on some of those study committees, along with the Belgian community, and I sat in on some of those. I think it was probably 2012 when that kiosk was finally put up. You may recall there was in the area of the Boss Tavern, if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, there was almost like a wayside that was designated, created, and then never used. And the Indian tribes didn't push the issue of having a kiosk developed for their sites, and my understanding is they pretty much kept them private. But it was the Belgian club, the foundation, that pushed to have the kiosk put someplace, and it ended up being on the foundation's property. So I guess kind of echoing Todd in a way is that I didn't see any real effort by the Native Americans there to have information put up on their land ownership and I think education, maybe our library, our museum should be emphasizing some of that information that was developed through the University of Wisconsin exploration of that area. I'm sure a lot of it is very fascinating, but to have the county board involved at this level presenting things at our county board meetings, statements, is not as important as the history presentation could be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Nissa?
Thank you. So my ancestors have been here for generation upon generation upon generation. And if you look for instance, in like Sister Bay history books, they're throughout it, which is something I'm very proud of. But at the same time, I also realize that they weren't the first people in this county, and to me, since I can date back my family so far, I support this because I realize that there were people here before my family, and I feel like they should be recognized as being here before the hundreds of years my ancestors were. And, something that Liz said about the historical, and Bob said about the historical purposes, I, for one, understand the historical purposes because I can date, history way, way back when. And so I personally support this definitely as a historical reason, and also because of the fact that it's nice to know where your history came from and hear stories about way back when somebody back in your family did this and settled here and and when it comes to, for instance, the tribal thing, there may be people that don't know that their ancestors were here. So I personally definitely support this. And thank you. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Susan?
I support this. I think it's a very minimal effort on our part. It goes along with our attempts as a county, our beginning attempts, to recognize the diversity in our nation. And it's a very small token of respect and recognition to the fact that there were folks here. And I don't see any downside to doing it. And the other thing is that I think it's appropriate for a governmental body to do it because, first of all, we're leaders, and so our actions matter. But secondly, in the history of our country, a lot of these divisions that we have been created by actions of governments. So for us to simply say, we know that you were here, we recognize that, we respect it. That's all that's being asked of us, and not even to do it at every meeting, I think once a year. I really don't, I think it's just a very minimal effort, but I think any effort that can begin the process of bridging the divisions that our country has right now, and we certainly have plenty, is not a bad thing, is only a step in the right direction. So I definitely hope that we will pass this and support it. I would also ask Elizabeth if she had, in her research, if she came across any particular articles or particular pieces that would be helpful. I would appreciate seeing them. Not huge, I'm not suggesting necessarily a lot, but I am interested in reading some things if you came across good stuff. Thank you.
If I may address that real quick. The chapter in the book, some of you may have the old Peninsula days. Are you familiar? Chapter 2. Take a look at that. Remember the author, it was written 1925, and the author may have sensationalized, and there were definitely perspectives from the author that are not appropriate for our today. However, if you look at the primary sources in the footnotes, it gives probably the most primary accounts of that time frame in the 1600s of Native Americans. So if you look past some of the sensationalism that the author's been criticized for, and look at chapter 2 more specifically, the footnotes and information, that really gave me a lot of information that I was unfamiliar with. Thank you.
Vinnie?
Thank you. I wanted to mirror what Susie Cohout has said in the basic respect and showing dignity and solidarity with First Nations people. I think it's a really important step to make as a government, and just acknowledging that people that were here, whatever time frame and whichever tribes we're talking about and groups of people, were forced to leave. That was not a choice to leave. So I think that that's part of an acknowledgement, is saying that you're acknowledging that these lands did belong to someone else. I think that's an important part of this. And the Menominee people in Forest County were some that had been in Door County and were now established in Forest County, and they have a lot of information that I guess I would consider more of a primary resource for the stories, to just encourage to kind of use that as a resource as well, is the actual people that are ancestrally related to the people we're talking about. So I definitely support this. Thank you. And wanted to just see if Bob is willing to kind of talk about a little bit of some of his discussions he had with some Menominee people on this as well, if you're willing. Thank you.
Kara?
Thank you. I really wanted to thank the chair of the Legislative Committee, Supervisor Boltman, for all of his work and keeping this on the agenda. We did have discussions like Zoom calls, and that was really helpful. And I also wanted to echo and throw my support behind words that other supervisors have said, like respect and dignity and solidarity, and that there really is no downside to this, and it's a really minimal effort, and it is something that government should do. I too have, I live in the house that my dad was born in, and his dad was born in, and his dad was born in back into the 1850s. Both sides of my family were here in Southern Door since the mid 1800s, and I know that there were people that were forced to leave the land before my ancestors came here, and I think this is like just a very minimal thing that we can do. So I absolutely wholeheartedly support this. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I wonder what the county plan documents are. Is a zoning change a plan document?
I guess our intent would be is normally we have what we consider our larger plan documents, things that we bring forward as far as our, let's say, our public health, our 5-year plan for that, our land and water is a 10-year plan. I can see our comprehensive plan. I guess I would not consider every time we bring forward a zoning amendment a plan. That's not a plan document. So usually it's our documents that we actually complete within a department and publish or adopt as a board or a body. Those would be, I guess, what I would consider the documents we're discussing.
And the other question I have is, the Menominee tribe wasn't the only Indian tribe in the county. Why pick out the Menominee tribe for part of the statement?
Bob?
Do you want me to go?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really good question, Mr. Ossted, and thank you. I wanted to address and also follow from Vinnie's question. So, a clarification about the Menominee. Okay, let's go back. So, from the archaeological digs that were done in Union, as Supervisor Engelbert mentioned, it really has been in recent time, because that was in the 90s, right, that we started the expansion. They started 92, did the excavations at the Boss Tavern. Those excavations showed that there were tools buried in wave wash sediment. Okay, so we're way up above current lake level. They were able to show that there were humans living on this peninsula when there was still ice. Okay, there was a glacial ice sheet just to the north. So people were plying these waters, probably in sealskin kayaks, just like the Inuit do today, living and existing and surviving in this place in basically a tundra land, a glacial habitat. As soon as people could be on this land, they were here. And so as the lake levels changed and as the ice sheet melted away and the lakes became what they are today, people have been here throughout that. And the excavations in Southern Door prove that for the whole Great Lakes region. I don't know that had been proved anywhere else in the whole Midwest. So those excavations in Union, in our county, were very important to understanding human occupation in North America. I mean, it's definitely a very important part of history for our entire country. It fits, it's a piece of the pie, piece of the puzzle. And so the people who clearly, we're talking 10,000 years, right? I mean, that's a long time. It's 10 millennia, 10,000 years. So that's a lot of time, and certainly migrations happened and people came and went. But the people and the groups that ended up staying and establishing this as their home were the ancestors of the Menominee. And so the Menominee, and that's through all of this research and looking in and talking to different groups and studying historical documents, the group that has been here since the ice, since the glaciers, are the Menominee people. Okay? They're, if you forward through some of those thousands of years, and again, it's foggy, and these are people who had an oral tradition. They did not have computers or books to write, that they wrote in. Their traditions were oral, their stories, their history, all of their scholarly work was oral, and that was destroyed by colonization. And so it is muddy, but we have to, there are things we can acknowledge and understand. And we know that the people that stayed here and were here from the beginning are the Menominee. The Ho-Chunk also lay a claim to Red Banks, and they have a presence on the southern part of the peninsula, but it's not Door County. Okay, so like when I spoke with David Grignon, he's the historical representative for the Menominee tribe. He said, well, you should mention the Ho-Chunk too. But then when we got talking about it, it's like, well, but we're talking Door County, and so the Ho-Chunk had a historical and ancient tie to Red Banks down by Dykesville, but that isn't Door County, right? So that's where our statement is specific to the Menominee. They occupied basically all of northeastern Wisconsin, and then other groups came later. And so then it gets into, like Elizabeth was saying, it gets into this muddy history of like who was here, and we don't even always know exactly. And so that's why I feel like, this is a very, distilled, very, very scholarly statement, acknowledging that the Menominee were here first, and they still are here. So they kind of have the longest tenure. The Menominee Nation is sort of the, first and lasting group, and that others have come, and that's why we just say currently there are 11. We basically just stayed with the facts, right? These are just facts. And then I guess the last statement is just us showing respect. And so I guess one little piece, another thing, we did have a good Zoom call, Supervisor Cunard referenced, with representatives who run the Indian School in Franklin, Wisconsin, down in the Milwaukee suburbs. There was one of those is Ojibwe, one is I think the two Ojibwe and one Oneida, and so some good conversations there as well. And also, as Elizabeth referenced, this was I guess a Zoom or a presentation that I watched regarding land acknowledgements, and that was kind of the summary that I took away was the only bad land acknowledgement is not to have one. Like, again, it's a super small thing. We're just saying, hey, this is fact, this is history, and it's okay. And like, we don't have to feel weird about it. It's like, let's feel good about it because this is about relationship. And then this is about us deciding what kind of relationship do we want to have with the world. I think I don't think it's right for us to get down on Indians for like not wanting to come back to a place that they were kicked out of, saying, we can't expect them to come to our county saying, hey, we want to put a sign up that talks about our history. Like, what? Like, we've already told them to piss off and go away. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why would they want to come back? So I think that's something we shouldn't get hung up on that. I think if anything else, it's our opportunity to reach out to them and say, hey, we want you here, right? So I think this maybe just does a little bit of that. But at any rate, again, this is about relationships, and we just have to decide what kind of relationship do we want to have with ourselves and with our neighbors and with our past. And I think to me, this is a really proud thing because it actually acknowledges 10,000 years of history. So thank you.
David, Enigo?
Thank you. I think it's pretty obvious to most of us that the majority of this country was at one time occupied by a wide variety of individuals beyond the group that are currently occupying it, not just Door County. So my question is going to sound, somebody's going to pick on it for me, but my question is, I hear references to private organizations that have done land acknowledgements and other stuff and displays, but I haven't heard anything about any other governing bodies that have done this thing. Quite often when we do this kind of thing that's new and relatively new for our county, we give examples of other entities that have also done it, and we're able to see how they've done it, that we are comparable to. In this case, all 72 counties and or villages, cities, or other towns for that matter. So my question is, what information have you reviewed that I do not see in this packet that is relevant to, and I'm going to direct this at the legislative chair, that was done by a governing body? Some example other than private organizations that have done it.
Bob, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're really kind of the prow of the ice cutter here. I mean, we're leading by example. I guess that's really where we're at. I mean, little by little, it's happening. Whether it's a village or a township or a state, people are making land acknowledgements pretty. Again, we're on the beginnings of it being a little bit more widely accepted, and a little bit more, I guess, normal or usual. But
So not that I'm necessarily against this, though I have difficulty in it. It's not a problem for me being the first county necessarily to have been an effort to advocate more acknowledgement, but it is a clear piece that quite often helps people make that decision as to whether or not they're willing to vote in favor of such a thing as well. As far as a previous comment about other nationality or Native Americans that have been here, I know quite a few that are quite proud at saying that they're Menominee, but I distinctly remember picking cherries on my parents' cherry orchard with non-Menominees, and 3 families, I just can't remember what their nationality was, and they're still here. Thank you.
Vinnie?
Thank you. It'd be worthwhile for people to just sort of research that a little bit on your own, since it wasn't in here. I know like most of the UW system has done a land acknowledgement on all their campuses. So that would be one really local state-supported, example. How quickly can I look up how many Wisconsin counties? I'm not sure. I want to try to do that right now, but I don't know that we're the first. It would be worthwhile to look, and we're certainly, I would guess, not the first county in the country to look at this. So that's just a couple examples. The UW Wisconsin system has extensively done this on almost every campus that I can see here. So it's not, we're not, I guess maybe we're in the beginning, but we're not really in the beginning. Maybe we're in the middle. So.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Thank you. Yeah, I did the same exact thing that Supervisor Shomo did, and I did a quick Google search. And I was like, oh, all the UW systems do it. All of the, like, I'm sure that we're not the first county, and all of Canada, basically, every single city, Toronto, all the city governments, all of the provinces, everything, everyone in Canada does it. It's almost, I think that's where Supervisor Gogger kind of got the insincerity from, because Canada sort of, there's sort of that skating that line of like, maybe it's not so sincere if you have these boarding school, which we have as well, but boarding school experiences where children, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of children died. And so that's, you know, like, this is such a minimal thing to do when you know that even in Wisconsin there were like 14 boarding schools, you know, that we stole children and put them in. So I think we're not the first. I would be surprised if we were the first. I would imagine we're in the middle or something like that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, nobody else. We're going to go to the voter board. That's passed on a vote of 15 yea, 5 nay, and 1 absent, 1 vacant, sorry. Resolution 2021-62, compensation plan. Ken, do you want to start?
Sure. You have a motion in a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Susan? Yes.
To adopt resolution number 2021-62, the Door County Compensation Plan.
Okay, we got a motion
And a second.
and a second.
Right.
So we have a motion and a second. So what I did is Patrick, I just brought you in. Patrick Glenn is our consultant at Conahan Butler that helped with this project. And what we're going to do is, I know Patrick did a presentation when we first embarked on this project. And what we did is at the joint meeting of finance and admin, we did an updated presentation. So I'm going to cover that part and kind of go through the plan itself. And then once we go to that, we'll take questions, and then Patrick can help answer questions and related to that. But I'm going to cover the presentation part. So just give me 1 second. I'll share the screen. So it's just a couple of slides. But first, before I dive in, we'll give context. So when you're thinking about this, and we're laying this out, because we did do the presentation, there's a little bit of confusion, so hopefully I can make this more clear. There's really 2 aspects of what we're looking at. So first, is this the wage plan itself? In other words, how does our wage plan fit within the market and our conditions? And does it need to make any type of adjustments to the wage plan? So that's one aspect. Then the second aspect is that once you have your wage plan established, how do you apply that wage plan to our existing workforce? And how do we work with that? So that's, when you're thinking about this, think about it in context, and we'll go through the full cycle for that. So again, just quickly, just to kind of go through, give context. So again, when we do this, traditionally what we have done is we always relied on what we call our comparables. And you'll see on the screen, we have a whole series of public sector areas that we look at for comparables, plus a whole bunch of other areas that we get our other data sources from that they can leverage and get information on. I also know that a lot of that data that they have from those other sources obviously include a lot of the private sector comparables as well. What you'll see on the screen also, like for example, like some of the counties, you'll see like Landay, Marinette, Oconto, Oneida, and Shawano. Why we use some of those as some of our comparables, what we do is we try to, if there are outliers, we try to identify it as outliers. So we still look at it, but we understand that in some of those cases, they're outliers and they quite don't fit as a match, but we'll still look at them. So anyways, this gives you kind of a context of all the different resources that were used to kind of look at this and put this together. The one item that stands out when they do the work, Patrick actually goes through, if you recall when we did this back in, I think it was 2016-17, we actually go through a comprehensive review of all the positions. And what Patrick does is they actually look at our, what we call our job analysis. So it looks at everything from educational requirements or attainment to job duties, responsibilities, are they supervising, what's their critical decision-making factors, and so forth. All of that is put together, it's compared against the industry, and then they also put together what's considered composite scores. What this graph is just showing you is that based off our job evaluations is that our jobs, in other words, most of those are falling still within what we consider comparable to the benchmark. So in other words, we don't have, if you'd have something that's way off this line, you'd have an anomaly and you have to look at that position and saying, well, why is that out of line? In general, based off that analysis, we feel comfortable with where our positions are, I guess, scoring in terms of the wage plan that way. There were some recommendations on some minor tweaks, which we'll get into, but for the most part, our wage plan statistically is solid, would be the good way of saying it. Then based off the research, you can see kind of where we're at right now. So you see in the light gray, you'll see where the market is, and then you'll kind of see where our current pay plan is. So the short takeaway from this one is that our pay plan was, I guess, out of date, quote unquote. In other words, we're behind the market in terms of our considerations. So when we're had some discussions with Patrick, and when we did this back in 2017, part of the question is well, what do we want to do as an organization in terms of moving forward? And how do we want to kind of look forward to that? So obviously we'd like to, at a minimum, make our plan at least adjust to the market. But based off our conditions, are there any special circumstances that we would like to consider? For example, we're on a peninsula, so we have a very limited draw in terms of neighboring counties we can draw employment from. Obviously, we have a very strong tourist economy, which is good, but also it's bad in terms of items related to cost of living, such as housing, daycare, and so forth. So when we're looking at those factors, and we look at that, do we want to make any adjustments to our pay plan to consider that? And that's one of the things I asked Patrick to look at. So again, if you look at the market, it's kind of that gray line, and you can kind of see, well, in putting this together, how we're doing it, he has it proposed. So actually the gray line would be underneath this red line right here. So this is our current plan at the bottom, the black line. The red line was one proposal, in other words, bringing it to the market. And then another option is actually to adjust that based off our conditions in Door County, for example. And really what that means is how do we address the pay plan and how that's going forward. So before I jump forward to that, actually, two of the slides got cut out. I wanted to give you some of the demographics on our age structure for our organization, but they got cut out of the PowerPoint, and I apologize for that. But in essence, and then this is where I guess I'd like to just talk about, what we asked Patrick to look at again was the market, which, and you'll see at the top of the title here, this says 60th percentile. The other option was to go with what's considered a 50th percentile. So the 50th percentile, again, would have been this red line. So in other words, we take our existing plan and we try to mimic it as close as we can to the market. And that's really what Patrick considers that 50th percentile of the market. This, like I said, the second option is looking at this potential gray line where you actually adjust it and you call it like a blend, and we're calling it the 60th percentile of what we consider the market. So again, when we're looking at the wage plan itself, you know, traditionally when we looked at the plans and everything, you'd have what's kind of shown on the screen where you have a wage schedule. In this case, it's showing it going down to 87.5% all the way up to 115%. And in this case, historically, we had what was considered an area where there are steps up to what we consider the control point, and then you go up to the very top and you look at it and you have what's considered a performance range, okay? Part of this still goes all the way back, what we consider before Act 10. So before Act 10, you had everything set up where it's all 100% steps, whether it was in the union or non-union, you'd go through that process. And if you look at what that trend is we're trying to, you'll see more and more organizations just going to what you'll see in the private sector, which is you have a wage, and that wage for that position, obviously there's what they consider maybe a minimum and what that maximum would be. But if you fall within that wage, you're getting paid appropriately within the market. And you move within that wage schedule based off your performance. And in essence, that's kind of where we're going as an organization. So by adjusting our plan, we're actually recommending that we go with the 60th percentile as far as our pay plan. But then what we do is we actually have it as an open scale. So in other words, we'll have a minimum, or what we're calling the base, and then we have a maximum. And then if you fall within that plan, then you just move within that plan itself. The reason I guess I'm recommending the 60th percentile is I feel very comfortable with the research that's been done by Patrick, but also the, I guess, the conditions that we're facing as a county. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but you know, for a while, I'm not sure if Culver's is doing it, but they had like a $2,000 sign-on bonus. The wages for them are $15 an hour. Target's the same thing. It's either $15 or $17 an hour. We're facing a lot of competition in terms of the lower end of the scale especially, but just in general, we're in a very tight market. But also too, we've always faced, even going back to 2017 where we didn't have these conditions, we've always faced conditions where maybe not every item of the cost of living is not higher, but there are certain items that Door County has that are unique in terms of whether it's housing costs or conditions of where we can recruit or draw employment. Obviously, we're very limited, and we're drawing from either Brown or Kewanee or Manitowoc, some of the Fox Valley. But again, if you look at our placement, we're still within a pretty tight radius of where we can draw our employment. So our recommendation is to actually implement what's considered a new plan that would be at the 60th percentile of the market. It's the actual numbers are provided in your packet, in your pages. So if you go to page 39 of your packet, you'll see how we're considering how we're implementing it. So again, we end up with a base structure, and then we consider a maximum structure. And then within that pay plan structure, you move based off the performance, which is also provided in your packet. And that has not changed in terms of its style or structure. So on page 54 then, if you were going to, I guess, move anywhere within that pay plan, it'd be based off your performance and how you score. So an employee get placed in the new wage structure, and when their anniversary date comes up, they can get their employment evaluation, and then based off their score is what's their percentage increase within the pay plan itself. So that's how it would work. So I'm going to go through and kind of explain it in graphic style, so maybe it would make more sense. But if you could look up at the screen, what you'll see is what I would consider our existing plan, right? So imagine our steps, you can't apply, I don't have exact dollars amounts on it, but just imagine that this is, just take one of the grades. So one of the grades starts at, $X, and this is the range that it goes through in terms of it's up to the maximum, and then there could be some individuals that are above that pay plan. So what we have now is you have your current steps up to what was historically called the control point, and then there was this open range that went up to the max. And when you are an employee under this plan, if you got, the green shows you how we did the evaluation. So between 87.5 and the step 6, if you got a satisfactory review, you got a step. If you're above the control point up to the max, you actually received based off your score, you got a performance increase based off a percentage. And then likewise, once you got above the max, if you're considered above the max, you only get a bonus. In other words, your base wage does not increase. So again, now remember this is the two parts. So I'm looking at how we're doing the plan itself. So traditionally this would be considered similar to your cost of living increase, or, well, it's not the cost of living increase per se, but it's actually what we consider the aging of your pay plan. That's what was the old terms. So if you look under the proposed plan, where do the market adjustment. So that's that where we went from the gray line to going up to that red line, showing that 60th percentile. So in essence, you take your wage schedule and it moved up, right? It aged. So now you're starting at your base is actually higher. In this example, for example, it kind of lines up somewhere between step 4 and step 5. So in other words, we took visually, you're getting paid this range, and now you shifted it, right? So that's what we're doing, is we're aging the plan to account for the market, and that's how it's being moved. So now what we're saying is that we have a base wage and a max wage. So if you're an employee that's hired anywhere within this scale, we feel that's an appropriate wage for that position. And you can obviously continue to advance your career within that range based off your performance. And that's what's kind of being shown in that green line now below. In other words, an employee gets a varied increase based off their rating of their performance. And again, those that are still above the max would still get a bonus. So again, if you're above the max, you only get a bonus, not a base wage increase. So then the question becomes, well, okay, it's kind of making sense, but I'm still confused. So let's take it through one more step. So again, here's our existing plan, right? And here what I did is I threw some employees in. So now this is the second half. The first part is, here's what the wage plan is, we're aging it. So now how does it affect the employees and how do we implement it? So here's what we're doing. And I gave you examples throughout the pay scale of employees throughout the entire thing. So employee A, they're at a base step right now. What we're gonna do is, because the plan ages, this would always be the same case, they'd move up what's considered to the new base, right? So that makes sense. That one's pretty straightforward. The question would be is that, do we want to provide any recognition for those that have been here because of the aging of the plan? Do you give any type of recognition for that, or you just kind of all clump them together? So in other words, a 1-year employee, should they be making the same thing as a 3-year employee, and versa all the way through the process? So with this process, we're trying to provide a little bit of recognition, but also trying to, I'll be honest, control the cost in terms of implementation. But I'm just going to give you some examples. So now I have employee at step 3. This employee, if you can see, they would still fall, like if you're imagining this numbers here, they'd still fall below the new base pay plan, right? So I got to move them up to the base. But now what I'm doing is I'm going to give them the base, but in this case, I'm going to also give them a little 1% bump. So that way there's a recognition in terms of their qualifications and years of service, potentially, right? Likewise for a C. A C still here, they're still below the base, so I'm going to bump them to the base, and I'm going to give them 1.5. So it's just a very minimal separation between those employees, but again, what we're trying to do is recognize if we didn't do something, we have them all clumped and there's tons of compression. So again, we're just trying to give a little bit of fairness to everyone involved in terms of how we're trying to implement it. Once they start to fall within the pay plan, you can see here this employee item D. In this case, we're moving them down and we're providing the base of a 2%. So this is where it comes through. We're saying for those employees that fall within the pay plan, they get a minimum of a 2% increase. Again, our logic behind that is right now CPI is averaging 1.45%, the consumer price index. And again, we're looking at this as part of what we didn't do any aging last year and into this year. So even on this standpoint, I think we're being conservative in what we're providing, but I still think it provides them an opportunity for, one, is increase, but also two, now they have a significant window of growth in their careers in terms of opportunity for wage. So let's just walk this through. So E, right here, now they're in an open pay plan. You can see they drop down. They're still well within the pay plan. So they're going to get a 2% increase. Likewise, now we do have employees that were, I guess, were considered max or above the max. With our aging, we've actually have a lot of people that are falling out of the max and back into the pay plan. So if they fall within the wage plan yet, they'll still qualify now for a 2% increase. And likewise, out of our entire pay plan, there is only two positions that are left that are actually above, and they'll get a 2% bonus. So this kind of gives you an idea of the two parts. One is the aging of the plan, and our recommendation is to age the plan and use the recommendation as put together at what we consider the 60th percentile. I guess I feel very confident that it puts us in a very good position in terms of being a good employer, but also competitive in the market. And then likewise with the migration, we're also, I guess, recommending this in terms of our moving forward with what we consider the open scale and how we're doing our paper performance program. I feel pretty confident with our paper performance because we've been doing that for our upper range for multiple years now, and we have done a very good job. And I do think it'll be successful in terms of us being able to move forward. So that's just the pay plan part. And let me just cover two last parts, or just one other part in terms of the recommendation in terms of the pay plan, because it's somewhat tied together. So if you go to your packet, the other part of our, I did talk to you already about page 54 about our paper performance. So this will be part of the package for the paper performance. But the other thing that we did have some discussions with Patrick on, this in terms of our operations, but then also with Kelly doing some research also, we do have some recommendations that go along with this in terms of our implementation. And that's on page 53 of the packet, and we did discuss this both at admin and finance as well. The first one is establishing what we consider a sign-on bonus. And this would be a bonus up to $1,000. And it would only be used for what positions we feel that are been open or significantly open for a long period of time, and we need to provide some type of incentive. For example, we've had this incentive in place for our telecommunicators. It has worked well, but we did have problems in terms of our recruitment. So again, it's something that would be brought forward to the administrative committee. So in my mind, we'd be applying this for a position that had been open for a long period of time. We probably had either multiple discussions at the home committee or the admin committee prior. And then we'd say, okay, let's try to sweeten or make it more attractive, and we'll have that ability to do it. So it'd be a case-by-case decision. It would not just be carte blanche that we're going to do a sign bonus for all of our positions. So that's one of the recommendations we're adding. Again, just another tool in the toolbox. The other area that we did look at, we looked at the wages department heads had the opportunity to submit, I guess, changes for all their positions if they felt they needed to be reclassed or if there's some special circumstances that needed to be addressed. In, I guess, the pay plan, I forgot to mention that you'll see some of the items were in red, some of the positions, and those are items that were recommended to be a reclassification of those positions. And I can give you an example of like one of those in a second. But the other part was also looking at just some policy stuff that we have, and one of them that stood out was emergency management and telecommunications. And one was for the training pay. We're making a recommendation to change that from $1.25 to $2.50 an hour. Again, the reason why we're making that recommendation is that in that area, it's very unique in terms of the 24/7 operation and how we actually do the training there with those individuals. So it's much more hands-on than, let's say, compared to either emergency services or even the sheriff's department. So we feel there's a distinction there that we can justify for that. Likewise, on the personal days, one of the things that is not so much part of the comp structure, but is part of the benefit package for those positions. Again, if you recall, with Act 10, the telecommunicators became unrepresented, and they were just part of what we consider the general, what we call the GMEs, our general employees. But one of the things that makes them distinctive, again, is that they're an operation that's 24/7, 365. And obviously the holidays and everything related have a different impact on them than it does for example, my position or anyone that works through Monday through Friday. So there's a recommendation to change that from 1 to 3 days for them. And then the last one was this issues that were actually coming through the highway department in terms of our recruitment and being able to bring on highway workers. And actually Thad, I know Thad had a discussion with Patrick in terms of this, the positions being looked at, but I know Thad just happened to drop the idea of, well, why can't we do some of that training in-house and then have a little bit of hook on that? And it was one of those things that is actually a really cool idea. We asked them to do some research and it came together, and we're looking at trying to allow that for bringing on employees. And I would consider this as a future trend for us in other areas that might work out. But again, to start with, we'd like to at least incorporate that within the highway department. So that's a lot to digest, and we presented it all at Highway and Finance. We covered it. But again, there's really, in my mind, there's 3 aspects that we're looking at. One is the wage plan. So again, we're looking at, I guess, modifying our wage plan and what we consider moving it to the 60th percentile of the market. Along with that wage plan, we're have a plan for implementation for our existing employees. And then as part of this adoption, we're looking at adding the policy that I just went over with. And likewise, we're also looking for the adoption for the pay for performance in terms of how we implement people moving in the pay plan itself. So it seems like a lot, but it all comes together as a package. The one thing I did promise I'd show you, this is an example of, would be some potential reclassifications. So I can give you an example. You'll see, if you'd like, on page 51, you can see there was a administrative assistant for veteran services. They got put in, it was reviewed by Patrick, and they looked at it, and they got, I guess, what we consider a reclassification. So it moved from a grade E to a grade F, and you'll see that in red. So that'd be also part of our modifications to the, I guess, our general structures. We'd include that, or those changes within our adoption of this resolution today. So again, it seems like a lot, but I will take any questions, and I know Patrick is also available to help us through this.
This appears like we might have some discussion for a little while. Would you like to take a 10-minute break? Let's do that. Let's come back at 10:02. So you weren't ready to go?
Well, I was waiting.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I was waiting for it, Chair.
Okay,
Are you ready?
left your pounding,
Are you ready?
get disciplined.
I got you.
Okay. We'll start with the questions. We'll go with Nissa first.
Well, if I could, just one, I apologize, one more thing.
Turn your mic
Let me
on.
just cover one thing, because I thought
Turn
this
your
was.
mic on.
Let me just cover just two slides, because I thought they were very important, and we discussed them at admin and finance, but I think it's really important for the county board just to kind of look at this. And in speaking with Patrick, I thought it tells a good story of where we are and where we're going, and why I think this is so important from my mind. So if you look at this is our age profile for our organization. And the one thing I'd like to point out here, if you look at how this kind of works, is if you look at where that red line is, so right now we have in our age profile 51.5% that are age 50 or above in our organization. In 2016, that was 65.7. So we were not worse, but the two things that in my mind off this slide that are really important for me in terms of takeaway is, well, one, if you look at our age above 60 or older, we're at 22%, which to me means we're in the next 3 to 5 years, we have 59 employees. Just think about that within that time period of the recruitments that we have. The other big story, if you look at those total numbers, that 59, 43, and 36, that's a lot of institutional knowledge that's with us. And as we start to lose those individuals, we're gonna have to make sure we do some serious planning in terms of making sure we have that institutional knowledge either documented, transferred, or how we're working with our transition for our employees. So to me, it's very important. The other part of this, obviously, is if I just go really quick to the next slide, and that's why I just wanted to cover it, is just looking at our service profile and how that's also changed now, obviously, which it matches our demographics. So this one, if you look at our number of employees that have less than 5 years of service, that's 124. 46.3% of our employment. That was at 28% in 2016, which matches, right? So we're changing over, and we're doing a lot of recruitment. So I think the things that really stand out is obviously we're going to be doing a lot of transition. There's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure we maintain our institutional knowledge within this, I guess, window of transition. But I think we also need to recognize that as part of an employer, we have to be not aggressive, but I think we need to be tight within the market of making sure that we have not only the wages, but also our benefits as part of our package in terms of making sure that we can draw quality people in to work for us. So I just wanted to add that. I thought these were very important slides, so I just wanted to take 2 seconds on that, and I apologize for digressing for a second, but I'll turn it back over for questions.
Thank you. All right, Nissa will try again.
Okay, now that Ken's not talking.
Microphone. Microphone.
So a friend of mine works for another county, and I don't know, maybe it was a year or two. A position came up in her field, but in our county, and I contacted her. Couple of reasons. I figured we needed someone, number one. Number two, I was friends with her, so I know her well enough that I think that she would be a good fit and all that. And so I sent her, I said, look it up, look at the job postings, tell me what you think. She got back to me and she immediately said, I already make more in the current county, because I'd asked, would you be, is this adjustable with wage? And I was told no. And she goes, I already make more in the current county, so even though I'm not happy at my job, it's not worth it for me to take a pay cut, because the driving distance would have been about the same for her. So that alone, when it comes to trying to recruit people, even in other counties with a decent level of experience, that has to be looked at. And if we're under what she was making in a job that she wanted to leave, that's an issue. We have to be competitive at the end of the day, especially if we want to get people who have experience. So I'm personally comfortable with raising the wage, and like you mentioned, someone can go work at Target, Walmart, McDonald's, wherever, making X amount of money. Why would they want to come here if they're at a job where they may not have nearly as much responsibility? I mean, work easier. Why take on X amount of responsibility when you can be at a job making the same, same amount or comparable, and just go in, clock out, and continue on with your day?
Vinny?
Questions. I will try to make them quick, but if you could go back to your slide with the compensation percentages as they were and as they change with the steps. I'm trying to consider the employees that are at step B and C and figure out how they would feel about losing 1.5% of their potential next year increase if this were implemented right away. So instead of being eligible for 2.5, you're suggesting that a B level would go up 1% instead of 2.5%.
No, let me just clarify
Okay,
one thing, because
that's-
actually
thank you,
Biz,
yeah.
so I'll go, I'm trying to get that slide up. But let me just clarify one thing. That A, B, C, and D were not the steps.
Okay.
Those were actually this, I could have numbered them 1, 2, 3, or employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. So that's what that meant, was actually the employee
Or
themselves.
they're at step 2 and they would be going to step 3, they're eligible for a 2.5% increase now, right? And then in the new plan, they'd be eligible for a 1.5 increase. That's how I saw it, but I could be completely wrong.
So this is just how they move into the plan.
Yeah.
So this is where they'll get placed in terms of the transition, but in terms of their increase is based off their pay per performance. So they'll get this on October 3rd, we'll do a cut date.
Yeah.
Everyone will move. So employee A, not step A, employee A will move from A to the base of the new pay plan. Employee A would then also, based off their anniversary date, then do their pay per performance and get their increase based off their pay per performance. So there's the new wage plan.
Yeah.
The migration on October 3rd is a snapshot. Everyone from here moves to here. And then on your anniversary date, you get your performance evaluation and you get your increase based off your evaluation.
So if you're B, it's under step 3, but that doesn't mean B was being paid step 3 and now they can only go up 1%?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sorry,
No,
that
what
was
we're saying is that employee, in this case, employee B was at a step 3.
Mhm.
The way employee B stands right now, if I draw this line straight down, they're below the new base of the pay plan. So I need to move them up to the base, but in recognition of their, it could be years of service or where we brought them in based off qualifications, I'm gonna also give them the base plus 1%.
Okay.
That'll be where they're placed on October 3rd. Then after October 3rd, if their evaluation's on November 1st, they get their evaluation and then they qualify for their increase based off what's in the sheet, which ranges from a 1.75 up to a 2.5% increase.
So the step
Based
4,
off their performance.
So the step 4, 5, and 6 people who do line up with the base, they would be getting a 1.5 or a 2 instead of a 2.5. Is that how it?
Again,
Still no. I'll let it go if I'm just totally
No,
misunderstanding.
nope, you're on the right track. But again,
Okay.
think of it as an implementation date and then their evaluation date. So the implementation date, October 3rd, employee D in this example, I'm gonna give them a 2% increase on October 3rd. Employee D then could still get their evaluation in December and get another increase based off their performance.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Sorry,
Yep.
it was a little confusing. And
No, I apologize. Nope.
The next part of this is the, is there any kind of study that you found in this where, like, it looks like if you were here 7 years, about if you took each step as a year and you came in at step 1, at 7 years, then you're maxed out and you're getting a bonus of 2%. So how often do you look at how that compares to market versus like cost of living? So if I'm like, what's my incentive if I'm at 7 years to go to 20 years if I'm getting a 2% increase on my 7-year salary forever, even if the cost of living or cost of market goes beyond that and, by my 12th year or 13th year?
Right, so let me explain that. I know Patrick might want to chime in too, but again, if you're a 7-year employee, like this is an example, you started at step 1, and let's say now you're in your 7th year.
Yeah.
Under our existing plan, that employee would have moved somewhere in the graphic, would have moved somewhere in this area here. So they're not frozen at all.
Yeah.
They'll still move up in their pay plan just based off their performance. And again, the big difference here is that it's based more off the review score here versus just a step. Even with the new implementation, someone now here that was at that 7th year, they're still within the pay plan. So they're gonna get moved, on the date of implementation, they're gonna get a 2% increase. But now all the employees will be treated the same in that they're all gonna get a performance review and they all can qualify. And they all can grow within their wage schedule all the way up to what we consider the max, or 115% of the market.
And so like now, how many employees are at the max?
So that's the good news with this
Yeah.
plan. I can tell you that with the implementation of this new plan, there's only gonna be 2 positions that are left that are above the max. Otherwise, everything else actually falls within the wage plan, and they'll experience a 2% increase on the date of implementation. So from my standpoint, that's excellent news.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Thank you. I was just trying to understand and illustrate that, like, no matter where you are in your position here, this would benefit you, not just people coming in new. So which
And
I
I
think
know-
is what you were saying, but it took a little understanding. Thank you.
I know Patrick wants to make a statement. Patrick, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself, or do I have to do that?
Nope, I just was coughing. I didn't think you wanted to hear me.
Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's important is that the plan you have today, it considers, tenure with the employer up to the midpoint, and then anything beyond that, transitions into a performance cycle. And with the proposed structure that Ken just walked everyone through, that you're not putting tenure with the organization at the top of the list. And I do believe, and I think everyone, generally believes, that there is value to length of service, but, performance really should be the top driver, people moving through that structure into the future.
Okay, I have one more question with this. I'm sorry I'm taking a long time. The other part is about, are there any incentives for employees to increase their education level, either through a degree compensation for receiving a higher degree, or help and assistance in paying for that higher degree? And is there any experience model, the example that Nissa gave, if someone came in with 20 years experience, do they start at step 1? Thank you.
Sure, I can answer. Okay, the first one is we don't hire an individual. We do consider their experience and where they come into the wage schedule, so that we don't just hire them at a step 1. So that covers that question. In terms of educational levels, we usually post a position based off that educational level. So that's what we try to target those individuals. We do have one position right now, for example, where we do recognize in health and human services, if they come in and they have their bachelor's degree and then they complete their master's degree, which is a preferred option for human services because they can actually bill at a higher rate as well, then we do actually move them up within a grade based off their completion of that educational status. We do offer, I guess we don't have a formal educational program beyond that. It's been discussed, but we don't have anything formally in place in terms of a policy as far as educational reimbursement or opportunities that way.
Thank you.
If I might add something, Ken?
Sure.
And this is more kind of a generalized statement regarding tuition or whatever. I guess two things. One, going back to my old HR days, I was always mindful of hiring somebody who had education above and beyond what we were requiring. I think sometimes that poses a challenge. It can be a very good thing, but it can also be a challenge for an organization. I think more importantly, from the big picture, as we continue and will continue to face some workplace challenges, one of the keys to digging out of this is having some sort of a tuition reimbursement or educational incentive program that really helps you grow your own talent. I know a lot of organizations struggle with that, with the fear of if we train them, they leave. And I think there's an old quote, and I know Richard Branson sometimes gets it, or someone else, that, what happens if we train our employees and they leave? And the response is, what happens if we don't train them and they stay? I think that, that's probably a good, kind of starting point from that. But as we look, a lot of the mid-level and upper-level management jobs are getting more and more difficult to fill. And having some version of that certainly gives you, at the very, very least, a pipeline of talent to begin to address some of those recruiting concerns. So that's all I have on that.
If I could just add, and then, for example, it's one of the things we'd like to look at and look at some opportunities. I know Kelly's been doing some research already, but for example, we had one new supervisor that we ended up having them go through the IMCA supervisory training, so it was like a 4-month course. And it was actually very good, and it was highly recommended. So I think those types of, I guess, advanced training, because we do have, again, you saw we have a lot of young talent. Hopefully that young talent would like to move on to positions that include supervising and so forth. But again, that's the next, so, but we also got to give them the tools to be able to do supervising and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the things we need to look at in our organization is what opportunities or what ways can we make that more successful for them to be successful in their positions if they want to move up within our organization. So.
Todd?
Yeah, I got a number of questions, so the answers can be quick. It doesn't have to be a big discussion. So first of all, when we talked about the market, the line, the gray line, that was the market line on your graph. That is the benchmark market, correct? So in other words, when you talked about comparables, that market line was based on those comparables? Okay, all right. So as I understand this, and I think you clarified this with Vinny, there's if we adopt this, there's a base move that's going to happen in October, which has a fiscal impact now.
Yep.
What is that dollar value that the county will be faced with in terms of that fiscal impact through the remainder of 21, if it's implemented? Is that 10,000, 100,000?
It's in the resolution itself.
It is, okay. Did I miss it?
The fiscal impact for the thing is, well, that's not, Steve, is that correct? I don't think that's the correct number.
Where do
Yeah. So the fiscal impact for this year is about 151,000. Then the fiscal impact, what we consider for 2022, for all of our wages, I think the total amount is about $670,000.
Okay, so that'll be annually once you move into 2022?
Correct.
Okay, all right. I'm surprised by the closeness of this. In other words, we're gonna implement this, we're talking about this in August and boom, October. Is this always, do you usually have this kind of compensation discussion and fiscal impact discussion that back to back? Because I would almost think, you should be thinking about budgets for 2022, not necessarily 21.
Again, so we actually, within the budget ourselves, we actually had the money budgeted in our payroll contingency. We decided to not, I guess, institute any change at the beginning of the fiscal year because we want to do the comp study itself. So in essence, we were waiting for this to be done and implement once it was completed. So from my standpoint, the other option we could have looked at was implementing it on, I guess, January 1. That'd be the other option, but this, in, I guess, our logistics side, in terms of implementation and putting us all in, we just backed it up in terms of implementation. We suggested October 3rd.
Any particular reason why? Was it desperateness for recruiting or holding people or just?
No, it's like I said, it's just that we had this, I guess, in the works in terms of our planning and implementation. So there was, again, it's just a matter of us just picking a date.
Yep. And then there's conversation regarding, the pay and where the county sits in terms of pay, maybe to industry or whatever else. I think anytime you look at a job and the likeness of a job or someone wanting to come in the job, you got to look at the benefits also. In my view, the county's got some outstanding benefits, and I think if you took a look at that compared to general industry, there are a lot of people that work for benefits, not only the pay. And I think anytime you talk about comparables or you talk about wage, there has to be an exercise that equally values that benefit, because that is, that's part of the pay, right?
Yep. And that's one thing we did discuss at admin and finance. So and Patrick, you can back me up on this, but again, when we look at our comparables are many counties and cities. So many of our counties and cities either match or have better. I think we're probably, again, within that, if I had to compare all of those, I think we're probably, again, in the upper percentile of that. If I had to go off the 50, we're probably somewhere between that, maybe that 70 to 80% range. But again, in terms of the wages and benefits with the private, that's a little bit harder because obviously from our standpoint, there's certain things that Patrick can capture, and Patrick, you can chime in a second, but there's also aspects that we can't capture, for example, bonuses and stuff like that, that employers that provide on the private side that don't account for their standard wages.
Yeah.
So it's a horse apiece, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime you look at something, at least from a general perspective of industry, you look at where you're recruiting or where you're losing people to. I don't expect you recruiting from Oconto County or Brown County or something of that facet. So that's why I bring that up, is that you're probably more competing with the local area. We've talked about being a thumb, hard to recruit and all those kinds of things. So you're drawing, locally. So that's why I think it's important to look at that. I understand what you have access to. There are wage studies, and there are studies that I think EDC does that compiles that from a general perspective. It'd be nice to see where this lands within that, just from my perspective.
So if you don't mind me chiming in here for a second, that when we do this work, we tap into several sources that try to capture the local labor market to the extent possible. I mean, obviously that there are very few, if any, surveys that have a Sturgeon Bay, data cut, embedded in the survey. But we certainly have data from Northeast Wisconsin, the greater Green Bay area, and then a couple of the surveys that we use try to do a reliable calculation using geographic differentials. And I don't understand how they arrive at it, but they're the reliable sources, such as ERI, which is one that I think is pretty much an industry standard. But we have incorporated, for those jobs, there's some of your jobs that simply do not and will not have private sector comparisons. Those jobs where there are, your accounting, your HR, your IT type jobs, when we can make private sector comparisons, we are indeed including data for that in our survey mix.
Usually from an industry perspective, I've been involved in a couple of wage studies, and usually implement very little or none of it because you usually don't like what it says. So as a county, we're implementing all of it. So that's, kind of one of my questions here. So, and I'm not necessarily against this, I'm just asking questions so I become more comfortable. So right now, do you have any pay for performance criteria at all right now for the county?
Yes, that's been in place since 2017.
And is it like this or it's different?
It's very similar to that, except the only thing that would have been different is that if you're in our old system, as I mentioned before, if you're between the 87.5 to the control point, it's an automatic step increase versus a percentage increase.
Yeah. Okay. She's got it right here. Okay. Curiosity. Okay, I'm coming close to the end here. So do we do currently, now you talked about succession more or less, but as a county, do we do any succession planning in our departments?
We don't have like a formal thing where we've gone through, but it has been an item that we've been looking at for the past year and a half. And I think what we've done on several key positions now, we actually work with the home committees and the admin committee to actually allow for the position to be we allow the position to be posted early, and we allow for a greater overlap with the individual departing, so we can work on transferring some of that knowledge. So, but that's one of the things we've discussed at our at least 2 department head meetings now. I know and many before, but in terms of actually looking at those numbers and how we're transitioning and trying to make sure we're capturing some of that knowledge before it walks out the door.
Yeah, and again, from an industry perspective, the portability of our younger generation of workers, I don't think you're not gonna beat that. No matter what you do, you can think you're treating somebody exactly right. They want a different experience. They want to do this. They want to do that. They're very portable. So we shouldn't feel bad about folks leaving because sometimes it's not what we've done or what we pay them. It's just that group of folks is very, very portable. So last question I have is that, as we look at 2022 and a fiscal impact of over 600K, is there any concerns about our ability to continue to balance ourselves in terms of budget with that sort of a fiscal impact, or how much space do you have? Is your back against the hot pipes in terms of being able to be non-deficit spending?
Yep, no, that's a great question, and it's a concern that we have. And I can tell you that with part of this implementation, we're providing for adjusting the wage schedule as far as, I guess, meeting the market or providing, I guess, appropriate wages, but we're also trying to, again, minimize the fiscal impact. So for example, one of the questions that we had is when we did the implementation, why don't I do a step 3 and we didn't have steps. The first version had steps to a step 3. And it's just simply too cost prohibitive to implement it that way. So yeah, I mean, there's some concerns on the fiscal side. The only response that I gave for both admin and finance is that the one thing we also got to do is make sure that we are paying our employees appropriately for what they're doing, so we don't lose them as well. So I'm gonna be honest, we're getting closer because of the levy limit. So it's always gonna be an issue that we're facing as a government because we have the levy limit. But the question is balancing of what is the appropriate pay versus, I guess, not having the appropriate pay and then starting to lose those individuals and losing that knowledge and expertise within your organization. So it's the balance. So my answer to you is that yes, I have it built into the budget. Yes, it's built in for 2022. Could in 2023 or 24, could we be talking about having to cut positions because of the levy limit? Yes, we could. But I think that's part of the reality, but I still think that we have to be in the right position of how we're paying our employees to make sure that we keep them.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily against it, just asking.
No, I'm just giving it the
And,
context. Yep.
and then with that, I guess, as what kind of causes the question is that there has been discussion and there's notes about adding, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 heads to the county, so to speak, in regard to headcount, certain positions that were gonna be posted, so that would be on top of that. And again, just, from a conservative perspective, just trying to make sure we're not over pricing ourselves.
And that'll be part of the retreat. You'll see that.
The retreat. So that was a put off.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on something that Vinnie raised, the idea that looking ahead, somebody might get to the maximum, and would that not be an incentive? And I guess you may want to elaborate on this or correct me if I don't explain this correctly, but the fact that we passed this today doesn't mean it's carved in stone. So since we first were in the business of having to construct a compensation plan after Act 10 and where labor contracts didn't dictate compensation, there was the compensation study initially, and then I believe every couple years there was a review to see if we were where we were with the market. And at this point, we're looking to recreate it, so to speak, with some changes. So the fact that this gets passed today doesn't mean this is gonna be there forever. So perhaps by the time that person goes 7 years and gets to that max, we may have had the review, or we may be looking at some changes in it.
Correct.
So,
That's a good way of saying it.
yep, yep.
Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 53 is included in this, and I just wanted to make a comment for the Highway Department. Currently, all employees have to have a CDL license before they're even considered to be hired. And as a result, we are not getting enough applicants for our jobs at the Highway Department. By having the ability to hire someone without a CDL license and then have them train, and as you see in that chart, they're expected to pay $460 for that license, and the county will then be picking up the tab for the rest of the application. And they're required to stay 1 year. So this is an excellent opportunity for us to get more employees in our highway department.
Todd?
And I agree with Roy. The one question I did have is, I don't know how long it takes to get a CDL. Is 1 year enough time? Is 1 year enough time in terms of hooks into someone for paying for the CDL? Or should that be considered to be maybe more like 2 years? Does it take 6 months? Does it take a year to get a CDL? I guess, to me, having someone stay for 1 year, they may just get their CDL and move on. Should that be a little bit deeper in terms of the repayment, maybe 2 years? If someone's dedicated to in county employment, less likely that you will arrive there to get your CDL. And I think that's what you need to be worried about with the change, that, okay, hey, I'm gonna go to the county, they'll pay for my CDL, I'll get the experience, now I move on. That's only my thought and recommendation.
Well, when we looked at it, we were comfortable with that, plus we have the hook in it too. If they leave within that first year, they have to pay back the cost. So,
I understand.
right, but we do feel that,
A year and 2 days, you don't.
right,
And it might take you 9 months to get it.
no. Yes.
That I didn't.
Yep.
Kara?
Yes, thank you. The administrator, you said we're facing competition at the lower end of the scale. Are we facing more competition at the lower end of the scale? Like you mentioned Target and other places, and more than the higher end of the scale?
Well, and let me clarify that. So it's not so much, there's two parts. One is compression at the lower end, just because of the plan aging. So I meant to say there's more compression of where the employees are falling within the pay scale.
Okay.
For that. But I do think we're, like, for example, we were facing more competition for our lower end of those positions. In other words, if you look at, let's say, our cooks, for example, that type of thing, I think the original wage, I'm looking back at Kelly, was in our old grade was like 14, and every place else is starting much higher than that. So that's why we're looking at trying to adjust that, so we're placed at a better place competitively, being able to make people apply for those positions.
And then at that lower, is each percentage the same as it's going up? So at the lower end of the scale, the starting what it was and what it is that a percentage of that, and then it's the same percentage of that higher one? I just didn't do the math because I'm.
So the range between the 87.5 and 115 is equivalent for each.
For each, it goes up the
Each
same
grade, right? But the percentage between each, from grade D, for example, to grade D or E, and then E to F, those aren't exactly the same.
Right.
Those based more off
But it's
market
just
that
that okay.
Patrick puts together.
Is there any, like, did anyone consider or think about raising the lower end of the scale or the spectrum at a higher percentage than the higher end of the scale or perspective? I know that when we first got the presentation, I remember Patrick saying something about taking care of the people on the top, and it was a hierarchy and trickling down, but I always feel like it works the opposite way better, and I think it would cost the county less money if you paid people at the bottom more and people at the top like got a less of an increase or something like that. It just so that was one of my questions that I had, and then I know that Supervisor Thays was talking about benefits, but have we, and this might be totally not the time or place to talk about it in a wage thing, but have we considered creative ways to attract people? Like Iceland just did a study about a 4-day work week, that people's productivity stayed the same or raised, you know, and there's been studies about like making people or letting people work from home more and things like that, and their productivity doesn't go down at all. Yep. So those are just ideas.
Nope, and those are great ideas, and I can address both your questions. First one at the lower end. Actually, we did, I feel, get pretty, not aggressive, but I think we addressed the lower end by 2-1, is we actually did adjust the pay scale. And Patrick did look at that pay scale, but then also, too, if you look at it, we're actually dropping our lowest level as well. Okay. So if you look at the sheet, let's say on page 52, you can see that we still have grade A, but we actually dropped every position in it. So not only did we move the wage plan up on that lower level, we actually cut it out and we moved everyone up. So I think we're addressing that first comment in that sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of the other alternatives, in terms of other ways for us to be creative, I think that's all items that we're looking at. I know the work from home policy is actually in the works. We were going to have that done, but now with this COVID thing, we're actually still allowing. We'll probably have some options for working from home again should things get bad, but we're actually working on a work from home policy already. For example, I know there's been lots of ideas. Like for example, I think Outagamie County they do 4 9s and a half day on Fridays. So some counties I know they put that in place for the summer, and I think now it's just standard throughout the year. So I think there's different opportunities. Again, for us, part of the reason, it's been discussed, but it's always back and forth. People come up, they expect the government to be open for a permit or something Friday afternoon. Do we need to have that? Those are things that we need to discuss, and we'll run those through discussions at admin. But no, those are all things we're looking at.
Cool, thanks.
Vinny?
I just had a general question connects to this, but could be for later too, is just kind of looking at the number of people that have, or number of positions that require an advanced degree or do not. And then how that plays out with how many are hired with an advanced degree. So the job description might say you need a 2-year associate degree, but are 100% of the people employed actually have a 4-year degree. I think that kind of when people are coming out of a college system or they have experience or advanced degree, they might be looking at that as, well, they're paying less because they're advertising for a 2-year degree, but really the job, if I'm doing it well, takes a 4-year degree worth of experience. So I think that's just another angle of looking at like how we support the quality applicant and how it looks when we advertise it as well. I think that tactic, I understand that it's used to keep the pay lower, but then if most of the applicants are coming with that degree, that's also to market. I'm just supporting what you're saying and bringing it up to market because that's another level.
David, Engelbert?
Alexis.
I'm sorry, Alexis.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo and kind of step off what Supervisor Cunard was saying with the increases at the lower end. And one of the questions I had on the slide where you have your current plan, your new plan, you're putting everybody on the new plan. Why wouldn't we do the 2% increase then and then address compression. Can you help me understand why you like did the compression first and then everybody that's not affected by compression, they get 2% increase for the cost of living adjustment, but the bottom didn't technically get a cost of living adjustment. They got placed on the plan and then they got an increase for compression.
Yeah, but you also have to realize where they're moving from the plan. So in those cases, for example, most of my GMEs that are above the plan are getting 2%. The ones that are at the base are getting a significant increase just because they're moving with the base. So if the base moves 5%, they're moving 5% plus. If I'm giving them recognition for their years of service, they're getting a possible 5% bump or 6% bump compared to the rest of the employees. So it's actually a pretty sizable increase for them in terms of the ones that are at the bottom of the pay scale.
For them, and so I do recognize that and I do understand that, but it's not their fault that we haven't been paying them competitively since they've been here. So that's why we're adjusting the plan in the first place, in my opinion. So that's just what I'm talking out. And then when so their individual experience will be much more. I understand that because you're increasing the base, but they're still coming up to the base of the comp plan. And I don't know, but I can assume that the percent changes you're talking about at that lower level, I mean, would be covered by 1 or 2 probably increases at the upper level too. I mean, just on an overall budget impact. When you're talking about taking somebody from 100,000 to 100,200 or whatever that 2% versus $14 or $16 to $16.30, I mean, overall budget increase, that's not going to be a lot. So I'm just asking from an equitable standpoint, why we didn't shift everybody onto the new comp plan, do their cost of living adjustment, and then address compression.
Well, again, from a compression standpoint, I guess we are addressing that. So everyone's getting moved into the plan.
Right.
And then, again, the implementation is that every employee will experience at least a minimum of a 2% increase, is what the philosophy is. So those that are within the plan that got compressed, in most of those cases, they're experiencing much more than a 2% increase. And I understand your argument saying, well, that's not their fault, they fall within the plan. But they're still getting a sizable increase for what they are doing for their position by us providing this opportunity. It comes back also to affordability in terms of how we can implement it. So at some point I got to draw the line in terms of how I'm doing the implementation of it. And again, that kind of brings up, so again, part of the discussion with Patrick and even with the department heads is that I'm recommending the 60th percentile to make us a better wage schedule. I got to afford it, but I could also say I could do the 50th percentile and then change it and make their initial increase look better, but long term they all suffer because now they don't have the thing to grow. I guess I'm looking at the opportunity that they're all getting a minimum of 2% increase in their wages. CPI is 1.45, and now I'm giving them the greater opportunity to grow, and it puts us at a better spot in the market to be more competitive.
Okay.
It's just a matter.
Yep.
I understand exactly where you're coming from, but it's just a matter of what we can implement, how can we pay for it all, and how. And there's always the 1-year implementation window of how do we get it to work, but then as we start to move forward, what's their opportunity for growth within the pay plan itself is what we're also looking at. So it's kind of a balance of that.
David Engelbert?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to make some comments kind of to some of the statements that were made. Susan talked about the comp plan before Act 10, and there was one back then, but it was the public sector. And so you were always comparing to other municipalities, to other counties, and really couldn't look at what the business or the industry in Door County was doing in Sturgeon Bay. And that was always kind of difficult at that time. But there were comp plans developed then. Todd alluded to the $600,000 that this pay plan would increase the tax levy. And we also talked about the new positions, and there's 6 in the emergency services area and another approved for HR. So that's probably another, kind of refresh me, 700,000 or so for those positions. another increase that's going to be into the 2022 budget. So there are some long-term repercussions by these actions we're taking. And then at the joint meeting, we also reviewed the part-time position pay. Do these need to be reviewed in this resolution too, or are they outside of that pay plan? I mean,
So what we did is what we're doing in terms of implementation. So we're doing the pay plan this month, just because the pay plan in the implementation has a larger impact on the budget. So we want to make sure that it's built into your books.
Mhm.
What we'll do next month is we'll actually adopt the part-time pay rates and then
Okay.
any new positions.
yeah, that was a minimal.
So the
one.
only thing you're adopting today will be the pay plan, and the reclassifications is what would be part of the employee changes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I guess, a generic comment statement. Given the fact that we are a peninsula, we're not quite an island. That'd be a whole, that'd be, I guess, another level of difficulty for recruiting and retaining people, but we definitely are a peninsula. That is a challenge. People are struggling with housing and childcare and a number of the, associated challenges with living on a peninsula. And so I guess I'm just, again, sort of generically hoping that 60% is enough, and that moving the base to where we're moving it is enough. Really looking at that younger workforce that we have, and again, we need to be businesslike, but we are not a business. We are facilitating services that are either required or that people need. And so I hope we can do our best, and it sounds like this is a good plan. I don't I don't have a sense of numbers in the big picture, but I hope we're doing enough to make sure that especially on the low end of the wage scale, that people are able to move here and have a family and have a home here. Thank you.
Agreed.
And can I make a comment?
Go for it.
That, when we talk about the movement to the 60th percentile, is that going to solve your problems? I hope that there's a general understanding in the room that that's not the only thing, that what we're more or less saying, with the recommendation is, to the extent that pay is an issue, let's try something different. And if it doesn't work, you revisit it again in the future. I'm not saying that you will need to, but just the point of, for lack of any other alternative, just taking baby steps towards where you might need to go. And I think the most important thing is pay is what we call a hygiene issue, that it doesn't necessarily motivate people, but if it's done wrong, it can demotivate. So hopefully we're taking that factor off the table. But you still have the whole concept of culture and some of those other factors that play into that work-life balance and relationship, that you really need to make certain that you're putting yourself in a position where people want to drive up the peninsula and to work. And so I think as a county and as a community, you have some steps. I know we talked a little bit about that back in February, but this is at least doing something, and I think that's the best you can do at this point.
Anybody else? If not, we will go to the voter board. Has passed on a vote of 19 yea and 2 absent. Thank you. Ordinances. First one is the now report Stager. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Dave Enigal.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept the report, the denial report for with a typo of the map is of the town of Sevastopol, not Sturgeon Bay, but that's been corrected already. The text is correct.
Any questions?
Mariah is.
All right, no questions. Since it's a report, we'll do this by voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Ordinance 2021-11, amendment of Chapter 18 Door County Code, record retention policy of Door County. Susan?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the amendatory ordinance number 2021-11 amendment of Chapter 18, Door County Code, record retention policy of Door County.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Do you want to explain, Grant?
Yeah, very briefly, what we are doing by this amendment is amending our existing record retention policy to reflect the State of Wisconsin Public Records Board Local Unit General Record Schedule, which was approved by the state. The benefit of us doing so are twofold. One, our existing records retention schedule is badly in need of being updated. Two, because we are adopting the Wisconsin Public Records Board Local Unit General Record Schedule, ours will automatically be updated when the state updates its schedule, and will make keeping our ordinance up to date pretty much effortless.
Any questions? Since it is an ordinance, we'll go to the voter board. That's passing the vote in 19 yea, 2 absent. Thank you. New business item, discussion of Door County Board compensation. Before I turn this over to Ken, I'll just make a couple brief remarks. This comes up every year or every other year, okay? What makes it significantly different this year is we changed, and we adopted our own changes to be able to do a hybrid system, which we were not able to do in the past. So that's why it came up again. The basis for the numbers came from what was being spent overall in the past 2 years, when you did the averages. And that the numbers that he came up with that says it's X amount of dollars per supervisor for the year for the salary is based on what was currently being spent, but just averaged over the entire board. So that was the basis where the initial dollars figuring came from. With that, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Sure. So again, today's made for discussion, because again, we have to have this in place by November. County board, in other words, we'd probably adopt it at that meeting, so then individuals can take out papers if they're interested in running. Again, we do this every 2 years in terms of discussion. We wanted to get it in front and get some dialogue with the county board, so that way we can get this kind of in place and the wording, if you would like to pursue it in the proper fashion. So in essence, just really quick, and we discussed it at the committee. There's really 3 options, which is obviously the status quo. The other option is to go to strictly a salary-based one, which that's what we tried 2 years ago. But now that we're self-organized, we can go to what's considered a hybrid. And I think one of the shortcomings of why the salary failed the last time was because there was some concern about individuals that spend more time on certain committees. For example, especially when you do like hearings, there was a discrepancy or felt that was kind of the imbalance. So what happened at admin is they asked me to put together a sample. They did that, and now they made a recommendation here for discussion of how we would put this together, and we're looking for feedback in terms of how it would move forward. So just really quick, I'll just walk through it. So under this case, the supervisor's salary under this hybrid option would be $7,500 paid on a monthly basis. That $7,500, again, was this based off a motion that happened 2 years ago in terms of where we thought the salary should be. When I originally brought it forward, I think it was 65. It was recommended to be 75, so that's where the 75 came from in terms of context. It was asked what the city makes 78 in terms of their salary, but this is at 75. The chairperson is at 12,000. The vice chair is at 8,500.
Can I clarify that for a second?
Go ahead.
Just so everybody knows where the chair number comes from, because I've been asked this multiple times. The stipend in the past has been $850 a month. You add to that the county board meeting, that equals the 1,000. So that has, the chair is not changing.
Correct. Sorry, yes, correct. Right. So the chair did not change. The vice chair would be something that we added that was considered last time. This is I guess the new item to address those with, I guess if they would perceived imbalance, is that a chairperson, the next 2 items, obviously there's still the chairperson gets a stipend for being a chair, and that's $250 per committee. And then here's I guess the change with the hybrid. Supervisors conducting a public hearing will receive a supplementary compensation of $25 per hour. So if you're conducting a hearing and you do a lot of time related to that, for example, the Resource Planning Commission may do that. Obviously, there's some of those that have been, 4 or 6 hours. Now they get their base pay plus the additional salary related to that. Item 6 then, I guess, would remain the same in terms of the, what we have now. It's still at the $1,500 for your training and conferences and so forth. Again, that's based off the attendance on attending two WCA conferences, 1 general conference, and 2 regional meetings. That's just an average of what we try to build into the budget. And again, we have our alt clause for Washington Island, just in terms of, obviously it makes sense to handle that a little bit differently in terms of the coverage that way. So the fiscal impact, again, COVID kind of threw off our numbers a little bit, but this base, so we did like a kind of a 2-year average. So if you look at where we're averaging right now, it comes in with our per diem and then our conference training lodging, we're probably about $168,000 per year. Under this new policy, you can see that the total high-end cost would be $206,000. But again, that's based off 100% of that $1,500 being used, which we usually don't get to that. So if I was going to do an apples to apples approximate comparison, it's about $190,000 compared to $168,000, or about $22,000 difference. So with the implementation, I can say that in general, that the wage would provide either a match or an increase to all the existing supervisors, just as a comparison. Obviously, the ones that are doing hearings would probably be above that $7,500, but again, with the added compensation of $25 per meeting, I think that would account for that discrepancy in terms of their general wage overall. Just in terms of, it's always asked, what's our recommendation? From our standpoint, in talking both with finance and all of the things that we do in relation, in talking with Jill, from our standpoint, the hybrid is probably the most attractive. Administratively, it makes it much easier for us to, I guess, go through all this. Although the spreadsheets have worked awesome, it's been a nice transition. I think the salary would still make it more efficient for us as a organization. But again, from my standpoint, it's still not, you have to do this type thing. It's still your discretion in terms of how you want to move forward. And we can still implement whatever policy you recommend. So preference, the hybrid salary would be our preference, but it's not enough to say that it has to be that way. It's still ultimately your preference and your decision in terms of how you want to structure it.
And from the standpoint of a individual supervisor every month, we would still have to do our expense report for mileage or conferences or whatever.
Correct.
But there would be no tracking of hours for meetings and that sort of thing.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Nissa?
So when we discussed this last time, I was very pro salary, just for the fact that I figure it would make Jill's job and anybody who has to track this all easier. I mean, that alone was a positive in my mind. I'm completely fine with doing the hybrid version too, because again, whatever makes the person who has to go through all of our forms job easier is great. I agree that the committees that are more intensive and have to do a lot more involved, the people running those should be compensated slightly higher. I have zero problems with that. For instance, there's a few committees I'm on that only meet quarterly. So that isn't as intensive as the ones that meet every month to sometimes a couple of times a month, depending on what's on the docket and what has to be worked out. When we discussed this before and talking the 2-year average, the only question I have is the 2-year average where it says conference registration lodging. So it says 16,000, but the salary base would be 31,000. I'm guessing it's because we didn't go out of town during COVID.
No. So the main difference on that is that, again, we built in a higher reimbursement amount. So on average, again, that 31,000 accounts for 2 conferences, 1 general conference, and 2 regional meetings.
Okay.
On general, probably a supervisor usually attends 1 WCA conference. Sometimes they do 2. Most of them don't attend another conference outside of WCA. and most of them don't attend 2 regional meetings. There's a few that do, like LCC, for example, has their conference that actually tries to encourage supervisors to go. So that would be, the conference outside WCA.
Okay, so
But-
that has nothing to do with COVID, that's just
Yeah.
adjustment for that. Okay,
Yep.
that was basically my only question related to this, is if it was kind of almost doubled because of the fact that nobody left the county last year. And I mean, personally, if it makes anyone's job easier to not have to sit there and go through everybody's timesheets and just flat out, this is what it is. When it comes to people running, they know this is what it is. I don't think anyone does this because they're going to retire next week on how much money they make. I always tell people, I'm like, it's a nice night out with a husband, and that's about it. And I'm okay with that. So yeah, I'm pro the hybrid.
Vinnie?
I'm also pro-hybrid for some of the same reasons, and the only thing I would add is that I think there's been a good diversification of the board as far as age range goes, and I think that has to do with how accessible it is to be a board member, and I still see that many positions either go uncontested when election time comes, or we have a hard time filling a vacancy if it comes up outside of the election time, and I think a main factor of that is, one, not knowing what the compensation will be, because you don't know how many meetings you may have, and that unpredictability is really difficult for people to make the commitment. Even though it's not for the money, it is some money, so thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also speaking in favor of the hybrid, and a good comparison for me personally is Town of Egg Harbor Board has a hybrid, and I averaged a lot more compensation, which isn't much, from the Town of Egg Harbor than for the county this year. So yeah, for people who think that it's a large amount of money, it is, I would think, difficult to attract and retain supervisors based on the compensation for county, because you are giving up jobs, you are giving up you have to be very flexible for this position. It takes a special person. And I think having a base salary and some additional compensation will be much better for attracting and retaining, and will be in better keeping with just even our town board compensation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Todd?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I'll have to learn a lot more about this. It's the first time I see this, so be interested to talk to some of those that debated this last year. But this would be a fiscal impact to the county. The way I see it's an increase. It's a pay increase, right, for supervisors, right? I mean, the difference between the 168 and the 190 or 206, whichever number you use, right? It's 40,000, right? So the headlines say county board,
22,000.
county board
And some,
votes.
probably, just so, a quarter to half of that is also, there was never a stipend for the vice chair.
Yep.
So that's a significant piece of that addition.
Yep. So I'm saying the headlines say county board votes itself an increase. Yep, okay, all right, just to understand.
I go back to my original statement when we talked. What Ken did, and Steve, they took all the pay that the supervisors had made for the last 2 years. And we used to publish at the end of every year a list of each supervisor and what they received, okay? And depending upon what you did for committees, either you were higher or lower. This basically levels the playing field. Everybody as a supervisor gets the same base salary. And that's what it was based from. It was based from what we had spent in the past. David, Enigo?
My computer is disagreeing with me. Couple of questions. The chairman gets a stipend of $250 of each committee. If a vice chair operates the committee instead, what happens in that respect?
We have to either address that, because it's not addressed in our rules, or as of right now, the vice chair would not get a stipend for running the meeting that time.
And I've made that comment every time this has come up through the years. Next thing, and unfortunately Elizabeth just left, I'm a retired town supervisor of Egg Harbor. Unless they've changed the salary, I also made more money at town level than I did at county. But The difference is we have a hybrid system like this in the sense, and maybe this has changed, and unfortunately Elizabeth just walked out, but it was, you still got paid for every meeting you attended. So basically, the organization was you paid a monthly dollar value for the typical activities you have ongoing all the time, and then you got paid for each meeting that you attended. This is not the same in that respects. I still come back to my same arguments in the past. You're basically paying people to not have to participate. You know, I have difficulty with that. If you don't attend a meeting, you don't get paid. You know, that's appropriate to me. I have difficulty with the fact that it is going to cost more based on this calculation set. It just doesn't seem right to me. As far as having the option of being able to not have a meeting, unfortunately, many of the members on my committees are a little disappointed that I routinely do that. It's not unusual not to have a TS meeting for a month or maybe two. So that already happens. The difference would be that now we'd be getting paid for the equivalency of attending a meeting we'd never even had. So I just always come back to this difficulty of recognizing that this cycle looks, acts, and feels like you're being promoted to being able to participate in a government activity even though you're really not having any penalties for not participating.
And that's fair enough. I guess, again, this is my only, and it's not a counter argument, is that I guess I'm trying to make it so I know I'm not picking anyone, but there's also a mentality that just because you attend a meeting, that's the only reason you get paid. And I'll defer back to other members. A lot of people come to the meeting, they don't get prepped or do anything, they just come to get paid. So what's the benefit of that as well? There's a lot of people that take time to read the packets, understand the materials, whether they're on. See, that's my thing too, is whether you talk to a constituent or if someone's not on an ad committee, the fact that they're looking at it at home and trying to understand what's still coming on and coming up the county board is worth something to me. I'd rather have the members feel comfortable saying, I'm going to take my time and review other committee meeting minutes or talk with that constituent longer, because that has value just as much as someone attending a single meeting. I mean, I understand that mentality, but I think from my standpoint, I think we need to change that mentality that this position is just not attending a meeting. It's engaging with the public. It's engaging in participating in other committees, even though you're not on it. It's engaging in trying to understand our capital projects. It's engaging in trying to understand our budget process and our CIP. So I guess from my standpoint, I'd rather get the people engaged saying that I'm asking you to serve and serve the entire county, not just come to a meeting and say that's what my worth is.
And I recognize you as making that comment. Ultimately, I don't see this fixing that. If you're not doing that already out of the 20 that are here now, then you probably aren't going to change your opinion of that. I ran by a request by my son. I had no clue what I got into, what I was going to be getting paid for, or anything like that. That was not my interest, much like town board wasn't my interest, plan commission was not my interest.
I guess everyone's motivated differently. I can only say that. And when we try to put it out there for people that are interested in running, you know, when I sat down with each one of you at some point in time, in some cases with orientation, I guess I try to present it as the whole position. But again, I can't, just as like a single employee, I can't control their mentality of why they're taking a job or what motivates them. It's the same thing I can't do with the county board, but it's what I can say of what my intentions are is the best I can do.
By the way, is this the final discussion here at this time, or is it purely a discussion at this point?
It's purely a discussion. There's no action to be taken today.
I guess our biggest thing is that, again, depending on how we bring this forward, we're envisioning that we'd have, Grant has it drafted, actually how it would look in the rules. So we could bring it, I guess our goal would be is to bring it in September, for example, or October as a vote. And if there's some type of tweak, we need to bring it back in November. We could do another secondary vote in November, but we're trying to get it where we don't run into a thing where we can't adopt it because someone doesn't like the wording. We're trying to get ahead of this game that way.
You know, I can interrupt. Actually, by oil now, we'll have to do it at the annual meeting by a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
That's one of the changes.
The April annual meeting?
November.
April's the organizational.
Okay, yeah.
It's got to be prior to papers being taken out.
Well, that's what I figured. That's why
December 1st.
title was wrong.
Okay, Megan?
Just piggybacking off of what Ken just said, that was going to be most of my comments, and I appreciate you putting that forward in an eloquent manner. I would also like to add that, and this is, I feel like I say the same thing every single time we talk about this, but I'll go ahead and say it. Like, if someone is going to be getting into this position with the mentality that they're going to cakewalk through and get paid, yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. But at least that, if they're not showing up for meetings, that's on record. 2/3 of what our position is happens outside of meetings, at least, depending on what committees you're on. So, like, yeah, there's a possibility of that, but that seems like just so below the work that we should be doing on this board. And if you're part of this board and you're an elected official and your constituents elected you to this, having just even contemplating that level of taking advantage of, or that would even happen here, just really irks me. So, the going to a professional salaried position, which, again, I say this every time, probably averages out to around $3 to $5 an hour for the work that we do. Like, this should not be, in my opinion, this should not be something that we're regressing back to worrying about whether or not people are going to take advantage of it. We should be far beyond that.
Thank you. Kara?
Thank you. Yep, I totally agree with that comment. And also, I would love to bring up that sometimes people have very little committee assignments, not by choice, but because they have them taken away or not given the committee assignments, and then they make very, very, very little each month, which is, I'm not doing this for money. I lose jobs, and I keep my flexibility open for it and stuff like that. So I don't have strong opinions about making more or anything, but I just wanted to bring that up too, that it's not attending meetings or committee meetings. It's sometimes not having the opportunity to be on them. Thank you.
Nissa?
When it comes to committees in general and stuff, if you look at the committees I'm on and the committees Megan's on, it's basically a stick with a branch or two difference. None of the committees I've ever picked have anything to do with compensation. They're where my interest lies. Health and Human Services, that handles birth to the time you die. I'm interested in that. CCOP, CCS, well, that helps people like my son. Obviously, I'm going to be interested in that. Library boards, same thing. I don't put my name down for as an example, finance, because looking at all that stuff makes my brain, and it's just not where my interest lies. It is absolutely nothing to do with how I'm going to get paid. Absolutely nothing. Because if it was that way, I would go for those committees that are busier. I don't, because I don't think I'd be very effective at something I personally do not enjoy doing or dealing with on a consistent basis. And like Megan said, everything is open public record. Anybody can pull up and say, oh, well, using my name as an example, because I'm not going to call someone else out. Nissa hasn't been to this committee meeting in 6 months. Obviously, there's a problem. That would be recognized, that would be looked at, and that's where people get voted out. So there is an element of, yes, you still have to go, no matter what you get paid, because everybody knows if you skip. Everyone acknowledges, and that's how someone could easily run against you with zero experience, zero know-how, and win, because clearly if you don't care about your county district and it shows publicly, that can all be used. So when it comes to incentive to show up, that alone is right there. It's all public record whether we show up or not. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Dale? You're on.
I'm on? Okay. I'm in favor of the hybrid, and there's a number of reasons for it.
First of all, I think that if we announce it, we may get more people to run for office. I ran and nobody ran against me. It was a tough campaign, but I got through it. I think if we can save money by not having all of the time for Jill or for someone else that does it, I think that's important. I think that's our job, to try to save money, and if this is a better way to do it, it makes sense to me. I think the other thing is, we all got elected the same way. We all got voted. We all have the same job. We all have to vote in everything. We all have to do committees. And I think from an equality standpoint, you know, we went through that situation with racism, equality, diversity. I think it's important that we all get handled the same. And so from that standpoint, I'm in favor of the hybrid.
Thank you. Vinnie?
I just wanted to comment on, like I said, I was in favor of the hybrid, but I also am in favor of however we need to balance committees. I'm on 7 committees right now, which is a lot. I work full-time and do this. And I committed to those and I'm fine with it. I'm not trying to make this about my own experience, but I think that balance, especially going to a salary, is good. If someone else, I don't know, if someone else is on 2 or 3 and somebody's on 6, 7, 8, it's a different job. And that's okay, but that's just, if we're being equitable, then I think that that's fair. It's not about the pay, it's mostly about the time, which I'm glad to spend, but there can be a limit to that too if the compensation is the same for everyone. Thank you.
Yep. David Engelbert?
Yeah, I'll change topic a little bit here. Yeah, I'm going to look at the mileage reimbursement, and that's been a peeve of mine from the time it was first adopted, that if you work outside of the county, you only get reimbursed from the county line to your meeting location. It was one of the supervisors north that worked farther away from the courthouse than his job, so he was able to get this passed. But representing Southern Door, there's perhaps a number of candidates that would work in Luxembourg or Algoma and need to come from there. So I don't know why we should be, someone down in my end of the county should be punished if they're having to leave work and travel that extra distance. I really don't think they have to be paid any extra either. So, I mean, I think it's just something you should take a look at as admin and make it more equitable.
We can certainly revisit that. We talk about that every year too, so. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Anybody else? Okay, if that's it for the discussion, we'll go back to admin and we will continue to draft and move forward on the, sounds like move forward towards the hybrid. Are there any oral committee reports? Anybody want to review any other committee minutes? Oops, sorry. Dan?
I wasn't gonna ask a question on the minutes, but I want to talk about the DCEDC meeting. Are they gonna pay for our way this year again or not?
What are you talking about?
Door County Economic Development Annual.
Oh, the lunch, okay.
Meeting, they always paid our way.
No.
Are they gonna do that again this year if we go?
No, we always bought tables, and we'll get to there.
Yeah, they actually paid our meal though. I mean,
No, we bought, every year we've been buying tables. Yes. Correct, there's no
were
pay.
paid.
Yeah.
We didn't get paid to go to the meeting. We got paid for the meal. They paid for our meal.
No.
No,
The county always paid
we
for it,
always pay for it, yeah.
for the meal.
The meal, yeah, when you buy the table, you get the meal included.
But you bought the number of tables for the number of
Yes.
people you gotta know ahead of time. How many-
Yes,
We're
we're gonna
gonna
get
do
to that,
that.
Dan.
Okay, I'm down.
Get in there.
Roy has his hand up.
Cancel, Roy's got it.
Roy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nobody talked about the Door County Fair yet. And the Door County Fair was one of the most successful fairs we've had in many years. In fact, I remember when we only had 8,000 paying customers come to our fair. Well, this year we had over 20,000 customers come through our fair, paying customers come to our fair. And on Sunday, all the stands ran out of water and soda, and most stands ran out of food. That was how many people we had. At the entertainment, where the bands on Saturday night, there must have been 600 people in that little area. The program was excellent. The only negative thing we had is that due to COVID-19, we didn't have the 4-H exhibits because the members didn't meet, so that was pretty light. But everything else was a big success, and I compliment our administrator for coming up with the idea of giving the employees a pass to come into the fair and a coupon worth $5 to spend at one of the stands. So I hope that all of you took in the fair. It was a great success, and hopefully next year will be bigger yet.
Thank you, Roy.
It's going to be in August, starting August 9th next year, so it's going to be a little bit later.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Engelberg, for bringing that up. Completely worthy conversation. I had the privilege of being stuck on the top of the Ferris wheel during the grand finale of the fireworks, and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. I was there 3 days. The fair was awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Can't say enough about it. Thank you for everybody who made the fair great.
Okay. Review of vouchers, claims, and bills. Okay, announcements. Budget retreat is September 1st, 8:30 a.m. at Landmark Resort. And be sure you bring your budget book that Lori handed out today.
Which room is it in again? It's on that sheet and then I didn't remember.
It's in the main, what they consider the main restaurant, so you go to like where the restaurant is, it'll be downstairs.
Not a problem.
The Egg Harbor room.
The Egg Harbor room.
So correct, we're asking you to, if you can, try to show up between 8:30 and 9. We're gonna have the coffee and danishes available at 8:30, but official starts at 9. But again, if you can get there a little before, it helps.
The next regular county. Next regular county board meeting, September 21st at 9 a.m.
That is a week early. It's a week early.
Yeah, yes, a week early because of the fall conference. DCECD Annual Investors Meeting and Luncheon, September 22nd at 12 noon, Stone Harbor Resort and Conference Center. We would like to get a count today of the people that will be at.
How about who's not going?
Okay, that's better yet. We need a count today of who's not going.
Or who's not going to sit at the county table.
Or,
Yes.
right, who's not either not going or not going to be at the county table.
Question first?
Sure.
So just for those of us who are new, can you explain the value of us being here? It sounds like a great event. Could you just give us a little information? And is it something good for us to be at?
So what it is, it's considered their annual luncheon where they do recognition for several business awards. So mainly the main things, you do a lunch and then they go into their program, they do a little report on what they're doing in terms of their work plan and structure, and then they do their awards. I think the value for the county board to attend is obviously we contribute in our budget $65,000 a year towards this organization. So, but I also think it's good from the standpoint if you're getting a heartbeat on what's going on as far as economic development in the county, but then also what our innovative businesses are doing. So I think there's value from that standpoint. So if you do have time, I think it's worthwhile to go.
One of the things is always a keynote address.
Speaker too.
This
Yep.
year it's going to be, the gentleman, one of the persons from Quick Trip, and as we know, Quick Trip, I think, is moving into the county, so Mr. McHugh, is going to be giving some motivational discussion, more or less, on the business.
Alexis, you got a question? Sure.
Yeah, how long does it go?
11:30 to 1 usually. is about-
11:30 to 1. Oh.
Yeah, 1:30, yep. About 2 hours.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So again, so who is, if you could give me your hands if you're not going to attend, not going to
not sit
attend,
at
or
the
not
county-
sit
if
at the
you're
county table.
Not attend for the county, I guess, sit at the county table. You're going in some other form or fashion. Got it.
Two. Okay.
Lisa, raise your hand if you're not sitting at the county table.
That would be correct, Mr. Thames, yes.
All right. WCA Annual Conference, September 26th to 28th, La Crosse, Wisconsin. I believe Jill passed out the
Shirts
information for
next
everybody?
Yeah, your information for those attending came today in that envelope. And then for those who ordered shirts will be here for the September 21st meeting.
And you need to get the money for the
If
shirts,
you
which
haven't
is
paid,
how
please,
much?
please pay, well, it depends on the size, but anywhere from 1708 to 2388, something like that. So if you haven't paid, please stop and see me so I can have that payment ready to go for picking up the order.
Kara?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about, because I totally forgot to take a check.
You're fine.
How do you do a card or?
Check or cash.
Check or cash, okay, and I can just bring it when I pick it up or no?
Bring it before,
Before?
so I need money to be able to pick them up and pay.
Okay,
So anytime you can stop in my office and,
anytime?
Yeah.
Okay.
The meeting per diem code is 824. And a motion to adjourn would be in order. We have a motion and a second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you, everyone.